Run. I'm definitely not his match right now. Jian Wushuang thought quickly. He was never an arrogant person. He did not think that he, who was only a fourth-stage great ruler, could compete with Qing Shuzi. Do you think you can escape? Zzz. At this moment, a shadow condensed in front of Jian Wushuang. Then, Jian Wushuang saw that Qing Shuzi had already raised the divine sword Jingchan and was about to stab his head. It was too fast. The sword was so fast that Jian Wushuang couldn't react in time to defend. At this critical moment, Jian Wushuang finally used his trump card. Innate divine ability. Life intimidation. In an instant, a supreme pressure from the level of life descended. This pressure that came from the difference in life's natural order disregarded cultivation realms. Even though Qing Shuzi could now rival a ninth Kulpa king, he was still affected by the shock of life. At that moment, it was as if time had frozen. Qing Shuzi's body, which was charging forward, froze instantly. Jian Wushuang took the opportunity to retreat. Without any hesitation, he turned around and plunged into the void crack. Ka. The domain of intimidation of life only lasted for less than half a breath's time before it shattered. Qing Shuzi's eyes were cold. He looked at the void crack that Jian Wushuang had entered and said coldly, Jian Wushuang, do you think I can't do anything to you just because you escaped into the crack in the void? Bang! Qing Shuzi took a step forward and shot into the crack in the void. Jian Wushuang seemed to have passed through a dark and bottomless tunnel. When his eyes brightened, he was stunned. A spire-shaped black palace appeared in front of him. On the palace, one large word was carved in a flamboyant manner. Tarot. This word seemed to have been drawn with a golden hook and a sharp brush. An extremely overbearing sword intent was emitted. This is. Jian Wushuang's body trembled and his eyes revealed a look of surprise. If his guess was correct, this was most likely the second level of the tarot ruins that King Zhufeng had mentioned, where the true tarot treasures were hidden. Just as Jian Wushuang was about to enter the palace, he suddenly turned his head back as if he had sensed something. Zzz. The void twisted, and a white-robed figure fell from the sky. Qing Shuzi. Jian Wushuang squinted his eyes. This person was really persistent. Jian Wushuang, I've said it. You can't escape. Qing Shuzi sneered. Die! The next moment, when Qing Shuzi was about to use all his divine power to kill Jian Wushuang, his face suddenly turned ugly. He found that all the divine power in his body seemed to be suppressed by an extremely strong power. He could not use even 10% of it. What's going on? Qing Shuzi finally noticed the existence of the palace, and he was stunned. Qing Shuzi, if I'm not wrong, this is where the real treasures of the tarot ruins are. Why don't we stop here and look for opportunities here? When we get out of here, we'll settle our grudges and grievances together. What do you think? Jian Wushuang said indifferently. The real treasure of the tarot ruins? Qing Shuzi's expression changed. After a while, he snorted and said, Jian Wushuang, I'll let you live for a while. Then, I'll take your life. In fact, he wanted to kill Jian Wushuang first. However, the problem was that his strength was greatly suppressed once he came here and he could not use 10% of his strength. Under such circumstances, he could not kill Jian Wushuang at all. Naturally, he could only stop temporarily. Hearing this, Jian Wushuang smiled faintly and no longer said anything. He walked into the Black Palace, step by step. The palace was huge and had a total of 5 floors. There was a long winding corridor that kept winding up. Pada pada, pada pada. The sound of Jian Wushuang's footsteps reverberated in the quiet palace, sounding a little dull. The Universe Origin Stone. A huge amount of Universe Origin stones. At this moment, Qing Shuzi's ecstatic voice was heard from the other side of the long corridor. Jian Wushuang focused his eyes and looked over. In a corner of the first level, countless Universe Origin stones were piled together, forming 10 magnificent mountains. Each mountain had at least 10 million Universe Origin stones. Even Jian Wushuang's eyes turned red as he looked at the small mountain of 10 Universe Origin stones. Qing Shuzi immediately grabbed a Universe Source Stone. Jian Wushuang did not want to be outdone. He stretched out his hand and grabbed another universe origin stone. Bang! However, before they could touch the universe origin stone, a light blue halo suddenly spread out from the small mountain of universe origin stones and bounced off Jian Wushuang and Qing Shuzi's huge hands. I can't take it? Jian Wushuang squinted his eyes and his eyes flickered. He pondered for a moment. This palace was filled with the power of restrictions. If he wanted to get the things in this palace, he would probably have to first control this palace and remove the power of the restrictions. At the thought of this, Jian Wushuang's eyes revealed a touch of enlightenment. He immediately quickened his pace and walked to a higher place in the palace. Qing Shuzi, on the other hand, seemed to be in disbelief. He grabbed at the 10 universe source stones crazily, making loud banging sounds. Seeing this, Jian Wushuang shook his head. He did not stop and continued to walk along the winding corridor. The second level, the third level, the fourth level. Jian Wushuang walked faster and faster. On the second floor, there were a large number of supreme treasures of principles. On the third floor, there were all kinds of divine herbs. The higher he went, the more items he found on the fourth floor. There was an ancient book floating quietly. The Tarot Sword Manual. A domineering and sharp aura was emitted from the ancient book. Jian Wushuang looked at the ancient book and could not help but feel a sense of worship. This was the aura left behind by the Supreme Tarot. After taking a deep breath, Jian Wushuang reached out his hand and tried to take the Tarot Sword Manual. Bang! An even stronger restrictive force bounced back. Jian Wushuang took a few steps back to suppress his boiling blood. As expected, the items in this palace could only be seen, not taken. If he wanted to truly obtain these treasures, he had to first think of a way to gain control of this palace. Jian Wushuang took a deep breath and continued to walk up. Half an hour later, Jian Wushuang walked to the fifth floor. It was a tightly shut door, and there were two huge statues holding swords standing in front of the door. One of them had a solemn look, while the other had a ferocious look. Without any hesitation, Jian Wushuang reached out and pushed the door open. Boom! Boom! A cloud of dust rose up, and an ancient, foul air rushed out of the door. The door that had been sealed for hundreds of chaos cycles had been pushed open by Jian Wushuang. Jian Wushuang's expression was solemn. His right hand held the hilt of the Wuxia divine sword that was hanging diagonally from his waist, and he strode in. On the fifth floor, there was a huge palace, just like the royal palace of a dynasty. It was solemn and dignified. Beads of blue light hung above the palace, illuminating it with a mysterious and hazy light. Jian Wushuang looked straight into the depths of the hall, and his eyes flashed with a touch of fear. There was a huge throne there. A figure in a dark golden-black robe was sitting quietly on the throne. This figure had his head lowered, and his black hair, which reached his legs, was scattered on the ground, making it impossible to see his face clearly. Under the throne, there were 6 mummified corpses with their mouths wide open and their faces filled with fear. This is... Jian Wushuang's pupils shrank. He flipped his right hand and an ancient sheepskin scroll appeared. Jian Wushuang lowered his head and looked at the sheepskin scroll. On the first page of the sheepskin scroll were 7 human faces. They were the portraits of King Zhufeng's team from 10,000 years ago. Jian Wushuang put away the sheepskin scroll and looked at the 6 mummies under the throne again. He was shocked. These 6 mummies were the 6 members who had followed King Zhufeng to the Taro ruins 10,000 years ago. Looking at this scene, Jian Wushuang did not know why, but he felt a strong chill. Jian Wushuang instinctively planned to retreat. Ka. However, at this moment, the purple-gold black-robed figure sitting on the throne slowly raised his head. All of a sudden, Jian Wushuang's hair stood on end and he felt a terrible fear. It was as if there was a knife on his back and he was facing death. The figure on the throne slowly raised his head, revealing an old face. Seeing this face, Jian Wushuang's pupils suddenly shrank. He was extremely familiar with this face. It was one of the targets of their visit to the Taro ruins, King Zhufeng. King Zhufeng, you're not dead? Jian Wushuang asked in surprise. Yeah, how can I die? King Zhufeng's voice was hoarse as he laughed. Jian Wushuang's heart sank. For some reason, King Zhufeng gave him an extremely strange feeling. He took a few steps back and prepared to send a message back to the Divine Life Palace to tell them that King Zhufeng was still alive. However, the result of the message made Jian Wushuang's expression change slightly. The transmission was cut off. It was as if there was an invisible force here that had completely cut off his communication with the Divine Life Palace. "My child, are you afraid? Why are you retreating?" King Zhufeng looked at Jian Wushuang with a strange expression. "A child?" Jian Wushuang frowned. This was obviously not how King Zhufeng should address him. He also found that when King Zhufeng spoke, an invisible power enveloped him. This power was extremely gentle and made him yearn for it. It was as if it really came from his father. "Something's wrong." Jian Wushuang took a deep breath and tried to calm himself down. He was now absolutely sure that something had happened to King Zhufeng. "King Zhufeng, what's going on with them?" Jian Wushuang raised his head slightly and pointed at the 6 mummies with his chin. "They? Who knows?" King Zhufeng shook his head, then looked straight at Jian Wushuang and said in a low voice, "My child, come over quickly. I don't like to talk from so far away." Jian Wushuang was expressionless, but he could not help but sneer. Just as he was about to walk out of the palace, a cold snort suddenly sounded from outside the door. Then Jian Wushuang saw Qing Shuzi stride in. "Eh? Is there anyone else here?" Qing Shuzi raised his eyebrows when he saw King Zhufeng sitting on the throne. "Another one." On the throne, King Zhufeng saw Qing Shuzi stepping in and immediately laughed in a low voice. Vaguely, Jian Wushuang, who was paying close attention to King Zhufeng, seemed to see some ferocity and greed hidden in his smile. "Old man, what are you laughing at?" Seeing this, Qing Shuzi's face turned cold. He snorted and changed the topic. "Old man, let me ask you, do you know how to take the things in the hall?" "You want it." King Zhufeng smiled. "Nonsense. If I don't want it, why would I ask you?" Qing Shuzi replied with a sneer. "All right, child. Come over here and I'll tell you." King Zhufeng's smile became more and more kind. However, the uneasiness in Jian Wushuang's heart grew stronger. "You're just pretending." Qing Shuzi was also on his guard. He took a closer look at King Zhufeng. Although King Zhufeng gave him a strange feeling, he could tell that King Zhufeng did not seem to have much strength at the moment. After a moment's silence, Qing Shuzi raised his head again. "I don't think you can do anything." Qing Shuzi slowly walked toward King Zhufeng. "Right. That's it, child, you just walk over like this. I'll tell you how to get the treasure." King Zhufeng's voice was filled with desire, and his lips were trembling with excitement. "Pada." Qing Shuzi stepped in front of King Zhufeng and looked down at him. "Tell me, how can I get the treasure here?" All right. Lower your head and come closer. I'll tell you immediately." King Zhufeng's voice had a strange magic power. Qing Shuzi's expression changed, but before he could do anything, King Zhufeng raised his hand and pressed it toward his head. Qing Shuzi wanted to dodge, but he was shocked to find that his movements were blocked by an invisible force. In the end, he could not avoid King Zhufeng's palm, which was still on his head. In an instant, blood and divine power were sucked out to King Zhufeng's arm and into his body. Qing Shuzi's body shriveled up at a speed visible to the naked eye, and he let out an extremely miserable scream. Clang! Qing Shuzi trembled as he held the Jingchan divine sword at his waist and slashed it upward. Bang! However, this divine sword that could cut through the sky was caught by King Zhufeng with just a gentle grab. Then, under Qing Shuzi's horrified gaze, King Zhufeng opened his mouth and swallowed the sword inch by inch. Kacha. In just a few seconds, the sword disappeared from King Zhufeng's mouth. Pada. Qing Shuzi fell to the ground and turned into a dried corpse. His face was still filled with fear. A divine son, an unparalleled existence among the ultimate rulers, had died just like that. King Zhufeng let go of his hand and let out a low and eerie laugh. The sudden change shocked Jian Wushuang. "Run!" Jian Wushuang was alarmed. Without any hesitation, he quickly retreated. Qing Shuzi's body turned into a dried corpse in an instant, Coupled with the 6 other dried corpses on the ground, Jian Wushuang realized that there was definitely something wrong with King Zhufeng. Bang! However, just as Jian Wushuang was about to escape from the hall, the heavy door closed automatically with a bang. Then, King Zhufeng's hair, which had been hanging on the ground, rose up and shot toward Jian Wushuang like sharp swords. The color on King Zhufeng's old face seemed to fade, and in a short moment, it turned into a greenish-gray rotten face. His eyeballs shattered with a loud bang, and the inside of his eye sockets became pitch black, as if there was a strange fire jumping inside. Clang! A strand of hair shot toward Jian Wushuang like a big snake. Jian Wushuang quickly jumped to avoid it, but the strand of hair hit the ground where he had been, creating a small pit. Something's wrong. You're not King Zhufeng. Jian Wushuang's expression changed drastically. King Zhufeng? So, this body is called King Zhufeng. King Zhufeng slowly stood up from the throne, and a piercing sound that was completely inhuman came out of his throat. At the same time, an extremely evil and overbearing sword intent burst out from his body, setting off a terrifying spatial storm. You can call me the Tarot Sword Demon, or you can call me the Tarot Divine Sword. King Zhufeng approached Jian Wushuang step by step. His hair floated up, his face was rotten, and his eyes were hollow and deep, like a messenger from hell. Boom! 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 The strands of hair shot toward Jian Wushuang. When Jian Wushuang's Wuqi divine sword hit the hair, it only caused a series of sparks but could not cut it. After dodging hundreds of strands of hair, Jian Wushuang finally could not avoid it in time and was directly hit by a strand of hair. It immediately swept up and tied Jian Wushuang up like a rice dumpling. Jian Wushuang's divine power surged and he struggled madly. However, no matter how he struggled, he could not break free from the restraint of the hair. At this moment, King Zhufeng had already walked in front of Jian Wushuang. He stretched out his 5 fingers and pressed them on Jian Wushuang's head. In an instant, Jian Wushuang was facing a dead end. This is bad. Jian Wushuang's face was filled with fear. King Zhufeng smiled eerily and pressed his palm on Jian Wushuang's head. Suddenly, Jian Wushuang felt all his divine power and vitality being sucked away by King Zhufeng. At that moment, Jian Wushuang's 3 gifted superpowers and various unique skills seemed to be sealed, and he could not use any power. King Zhufeng's palm was like a black hole that could swallow everything, constantly devouring Jian Wushuang's life force and divine power. Suddenly, King Zhufeng's hands stopped moving, as if he had discovered something, and he let out an interested sound. This junior's divine power is so vast. It's unbelievable. He's only a 4th stage great ruler, but his comprehension of the universe's principles is comparable to ordinary supremes. TSK. With such talent, he must be a top genius in the outside world. It's a pity to die here. King Zhufeng clicked his tongue and shook his head. Although he was full of praise, the cold and greedy look on his face did not decrease at all. He was absorbing Jian Wushuang's divine power and life force, so he could naturally see the density of Jian Wushuang's divine power. As for Jian Wushuang's comprehension of the universe principles, he had no idea how King Zhufeng could see it. King Zhufeng did not stop. He continued to devour Jian Wushuang's life force and divine power. Jian Wushuang's eyes gradually turned black and then slowly closed under the tremendous devouring power. Bang! At that moment, Jian Wushuang's armor suddenly glowed and a shadow with a cold expression suddenly appeared in front of him. It was the protective seal that Blood Wave Supreme had left on his armor. How audacious! Which demon dares to hurt the disciples of our divine palace? Die! The Blood Wave ruler extended a finger and pointed it at King Zhufeng with the power to destroy the stars. The power of a supreme being. King Zhufeng narrowed his eyes and sneered. If your true body was here, I would be a little afraid. It's just a protective seal. How dare you be so presumptuous? Get lost. King Zhufeng's face turned serious as a bunch of black hair rose from the back of his head. Like a javelin, it instantly pierced through the protective seal of Blood Wave Supreme. Rumble! The apparition of the Blood Wave ruler crumbled into pieces. Humph. When I was still alive, a supreme like you didn't even have the qualifications for me to make a move, and now you dare to stop me? King Zhufeng sneered. His rotten face looked a little ferocious. He continued to press his palm on Jian Wushuang's head, and he devoured the life force and divine power. King Zhufeng felt the endless vitality and divine power coming from his arm, and a look of joy appeared on his face. Just as Jian Wushuang was about to turn into a dried corpse, King Zhufeng's hands stopped and a look of surprise flashed across his face. How is that possible? The strength of this junior's divine power was actually more than 10,000 times? Even the legendary perfect life form, who had developed his innate advantages to the extreme, couldn't have godly power that was 10,000 times stronger. Could it be? As a remnant of the Tarot Supreme's violent aura before his death, or rather, as the current sword spirit of the Tarot Divine Sword, he had seen many things. He knew a lot about special life forms. At the same time, he also knew that in terms of divine power, the strongest perfect life form, when they fully developed their innate advantages, would only have divine power that was 10,000 times stronger than ordinary cultivators. But now, as he was absorbing Jian Wushuang's divine power, he could clearly feel that Jian Wushuang's divine power was much stronger than an ordinary fourth-stage ruler's. It was definitely more than 10,000 times stronger. If his divine power was more than 10,000 times stronger, then wouldn't the life level of this junior in front of him be higher than that of a perfect life form? Ha 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 ha. The heavens did not give me, Tarot, but gave me such a great fortune. The ugly and rotten faces of King Zhufeng and the sword spirit of Tarot were instantly filled with ecstasy. At that moment he changed his mind. He no longer wanted to kill Jian Wushuang. Instead, he wanted to possess Jian Wushuang. He was going to inherit this body that was extremely talented and had a life level that far exceeded perfection. Spirit devouring. Die! King Zhufeng shouted. Then, a terrifying scene appeared. From the center of King Zhufeng's eyebrows, his flesh was torn apart, and a dark golden sword tip slowly extended out. The sword tip, the sword body, the sword hilt. In just a few breaths, a dark golden sword with countless mysterious Tao patterns on the blade, and a bloody vertical eye on the hilt came out of King Zhufeng's body. This was none other than the Tarot sword that had struck fear into the hearts of all the races of the universe millions of chaos cycles ago. The Tarot sword was filled with a demonic and evil aura. It had been nourished by the baleful energy left behind by the Tarot supremacy of millions of chaos cycles, and it had completely transformed into a demonic sword. Whoosh! The tip of the Tarot divine sword rotated slightly and then slowly stabbed toward the space between Jian Wushuang's eyebrows. King Zhufeng's body shriveled up at a visible speed, turning into a dry corpse and finally melting into a pool of blood. Ka. The Tarot divine sword entered Jian Wushuang's forehead inch by inch. After a while, the Tarot divine sword had completely entered Jian Wushuang's body. The strange thing was that there was no wound or blood between his eyebrows. Bang! The next moment, Jian Wushuang suddenly opened his eyes. The pupils in his eyes disappeared and were replaced by a deep void. Jian Wushuang? Very good. From today on, I am the sword demon, Jian Wushuang. Jian Wushuang opened the corners of his mouth and let out a low and strange laugh. The laughter echoed in the huge hall and seemed extremely eerie. His body was floating in the void. With a pull of his right hand, the countless javelins-like hair suddenly turned into countless black lines and returned to Jian Wushuang's hand. Then he stepped down from the void and carefully felt the body. A satisfied smile appeared on his face. With this body, I'll be able to reach the peak of the universe once again, and I'll be even stronger than I was in my last life. But this body is still too weak. I have to think of a way to make this body stronger, or it'll be a waste. Jian Wushuang muttered to himself and then pulled out the Wuxia divine sword. He looked at it and shook his head. Then, let's start by strengthening this sword. Jian Wushuang stepped into the third level of the hall, where countless principles, cardinal treasures, and divine materials for refining weapons were piled up. Evil dragon's venomous fangs, chaotic cold iron, the core of the universe, star essence. One by one, Supreme-grade blacksmithing materials that were enough to cause a sensation in the outside world shot into Jian Wushuang's hands. After a closer look, there were at least 100 of them. Jian Wushuang nodded and sat down with his legs crossed. He pulled out the Wuxia divine sword and said in a low voice, "Refine!" In an instant, a black divine flame condensed in front of him and burned the void. The greatest fortune that belonged to Jian Wushuang in his entire life had begun. In the great hall on the second level of the Taro ruins, Jian Wushuang sat cross-legged, and in front of him, a cluster of black divine fire burned the void. In the divine fire, the Wuxia divine sword was melting and reforming continuously. Although Jian Wushuang and Qing Shuzi could see the supreme-grade divine materials before, they could not take them away. Now, Jian Wushuang grabbed them from the second level of the hall and threw them into the black divine fire. Then, they were refined into the Wuxia divine sword to improve its grade. Time flew by. In a flash, 100 years had passed. It's done. Jian Wushuang spread his fingers. The Wuxia divine sword, which was floating in the air, suddenly let out a clear sound and flew back into his hand. Clang! Jian Wushuang stretched out his finger and flicked the blade. In an instant, the Wuxia divine sword trembled hundreds of millions of times. The void seemed to be trembling. He. Although this sword has not broken through to the level of a supreme weapon, it has already reached the limit of a nomological supreme treasure. In terms of power, it's 1,000 times stronger than before. A satisfied smile appeared on Jian Wushuang's pale and strange face. He waved his hand and immediately put the Wuxia divine sword into his interspatial ring. Next, I'll improve this body. Jian Wushuang's eyes flashed with a slight look of contemplation. He casually flipped through the interspatial ring, and a look of surprise suddenly flashed across his face. Mid-grade nomological Dao fruit? Wait, this is a 9-leaf swordgrass. Jian Wushuang's face was filled with joy. To him, a mid-grade Dao fruit of law was nothing. There was more than one mid-grade Dao fruit of law on the third level of the palace. However, the 9-leaf swordgrass was different. The 9-leaf swordgrass was a godly medicine that countless swordsmen dreamed of. It contained the comprehension of the origin of the way of the sword. It was the most primitive principles of the way of the sword at the beginning of the universe. It had incredible uses for any sword cultivator. I didn't expect this junior to have such an opportunity. Fine. I'll improve my sword Dao universe origin first. Jian Wushuang swallowed the 9-leaf swordgrass and the mid-grade Dao fruit of laws in one gulp and started a new round of improvement. At the same time, in the Divine Life Palace, in the Supreme Shrine where Supreme Blood Wave was located, impudent, the Blood Wave Supreme, who had been resting with his eyes closed, suddenly opened them, and a look of anger flashed across his face. Blood Wave, what happened? Supreme Giant Axe, who was standing beside him, could not help but frown and ask. He and the Blood Wave ruler had been friends for dozens of chaos cycles, and he had rarely seen the Blood Wave ruler so enraged. He could not help but feel a sense of confusion. Jian Wushuang, something has happened. Supreme Blood Wave said slowly. What did you just say? Giant Axe Supreme was shocked. He knew how much the Blood Wave Supreme valued and looked forward to seeing Jian Wushuang. He felt the same way. A perfect being with such great talent and incredible potential had never been seen since the Divine Life Palace was established. The protective mark I left on Jian Wushuang's armor has been erased. The Blood Wave ruler's face was dark, and his eyes were filled with cold killing intent. Giant Axe Supreme's eyes flickered when he heard this. He knew about the protective mark that Blood Wave Supreme had left in Jian Wushuang's armor. Could be said that, with the mark, no one in the world could hurt Jian Wushuang except a Supreme. This was also the reason why the Blood Wave ruler dared to let Jian Wushuang go to the Taro ruins as a 4th-level ruler. However, the Blood Wave Supreme was now telling him that the protective seal had been forcefully erased. What kind of concept was that? Could it be that a supreme martial artist had appeared in the Taro ruins? Taking a deep breath, Supreme Giant Axe said in a deep voice, Blood Wave, the protection mark being erased doesn't mean that Jian Wushuang is dead. Why don't we go to the Life Palace to see if Jian Wushuang's life lamp has been extinguished? The Divine Lamp of Life Hall was the place where every cultivator of the Divine Life Palace left their life imprint. As long as a cultivator of the Divine Life Palace died, the lamp of life he left in the hall of the Divine Lamp of Life would be extinguished. Yes. The Blood Wave ruler nodded with an unsightly expression. He had already made up his mind. If Jian Wushuang really died in the Taro ruins, then no matter who killed Jian Wushuang, no matter what his background was, he would kill him. After a while, they arrived at the Life Palace and saw Jian Wushuang's lamp of life. It was an ancient bronze lamp, and the flame burning on it was much weaker than the other ancient lamps. However, when the Blood Wave Supreme and the Giant Axe Supreme saw this, they both heaved a sigh of relief. It's good. Although Jian Wushuang's lamp of life is weak, it hasn't been completely extinguished. At least it means that he's still alive, said Giant Axe Ruler. The Blood Wave Ruler's originally gloomy face relaxed upon seeing this. He snorted coldly and said, "It's a good thing he didn't die, or else—" The Blood Wave Ruler paused. All right. Since Jian Wushuang is not dead, we'll leave everything to him. I believe that he has his own good fortune, and there's no need for us to interfere." Supreme Giant Axe consoled him with a smile. The Blood Wave Ruler nodded, and the two of them gradually disappeared from the Temple of the Divine Lamp of Life. Taro Ruins, 2nd level. Jian Wushuang was sitting cross-legged, constantly refining the 9-leaf swordgrass and the middle-grade Dao fruit of laws. Waves of sword Dao origin and universe law energy wrapped around him like a ball. At the same time, in the depths of Jian Wushuang's soul realm, a real consciousness that belonged to Jian Wushuang slowly awakened. As expected, the best choice is to go into hiding. The consciousness that belonged to Jian Wushuang woke up instantly. Memories flooded into his mind and he understood everything in an instant. The grade of the Wuxia Divine Sword has already been raised to the level of a supreme treasure of principles. The consciousness body formed by Jian Wushuang's consciousness squinted. He suppressed the idea of repossessing the body. He could feel that the person who had taken his body away was actually trying every possible way to improve his body. The level of effort made him feel a little ashamed of his inferiority. Since that's the case, there's no need to rush. Jian Wushuang's consciousness form's eyes flickered and he instantly made a decision to wait and see. The sword spirit of the Taro Divine Sword contained the remnant will of Taro Supreme. It had followed Taro Supreme to the north and south and had seen many things. However, although the sword spirit was knowledgeable, Jian Wushuang, who he was facing, was a perfect life form that was rare to see in an era of the universe. The sword spirit knew a little about perfect life forms. For example, he knew that perfect life forms could develop their innate advantages to the extreme and their divine power could be 10,000 times stronger than that of ordinary cultivators. However, there were some extremely secretive things that the sword spirit did not know. For example, the unique immortal body possessed by a perfect life form was to completely integrate one's soul origin into divine power. As long as the divine power was not completely destroyed, one would not die. It was because of this that Jian Wushuang was unrivaled in the soul aspect. Devil Flame had once tried to possess Jian Wushuang, and his soul power was far stronger than Jian Wushuang's. In the end, Devil Flame became Jian Wushuang's slave. No one could attack a perfect life form from the soul. The sword spirit performed the same possession technique on Jian Wushuang. It seemed that he had occupied Jian Wushuang's divine body, Jian Wushuang's entire body. In actual fact, Jian Wushuang had intentionally allowed him to control his divine body while his consciousness had already gone dormant. He had no choice but to do this. If the Taro Divine Sword's sword spirit knew that possession was useless against him, it might directly absorb all of his divine power and vitality. At that time, he would really die. Now, the sword spirit of the Taro Divine Sword had not only possessed him, but it was also trying to improve his strength after thinking that it had successfully possessed him. Jian Wushuang naturally enjoyed it. I'd like to see how much he can improve my strength. Jian Wushuang's consciousness form muttered to himself. Then, the consciousness completely merged with his divine power. No matter how brilliant the Taro Divine Sword's sword spirit was, it would definitely not be able to discover the existence of his consciousness. With a single thought, thousands of rivers and mountains could be seen. With a single thought, the world would change. The vast universe would never stop moving forward just because someone was missing. The killing in the universe was constantly happening, and the battle in the Tarot ruins had never stopped. In the blink of an eye, 1,000 years had passed. In a crack in the void on the second level of the Tarot ruins, Jian Wushuang slowly opened his eyes. In his deep, whirlpool-like eyes, there was a ball of coquettish ghost fire jumping. Ha 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 ha! The heavens have blessed me. I didn't expect this junior's talent in sword principle to be so high. In just a short 1,000 years, my comprehension of the sword principle of the universe origin has reached the third realm. Jian Wushuang stretched out his 5 fingers, covered his face, and laughed in a low voice. He was just a sword spirit and did not have any comprehension of sword principle before. However, after controlling Jian Wushuang's body, he naturally grasped everything Jian Wushuang had comprehended. Jian Wushuang's comprehension of the sword principle of the universe origin had already reached the point of near completion. In the past 1,000 years, thanks to the 9-leaf swordgrass, he had not only reconstructed Supreme Tarot's Tarot sword principle from his previous life, but he had also pushed it to the third level of sword principle origin. In addition, the mid-grade nomological Tao fruit was also very useful. It greatly improved his comprehension of the principles of the universe and even benefited him greatly in the principles of the heaven and earth. The 8th law of the heaven and earth had already begun to show signs of fusion. It seems like it's only a matter of time before we return to the peak. This universe is destined to be the era of my tarot. Jian Wushuang smiled eerily. He had already started to imagine the beautiful blueprint of his future in the universe after he had completely mastered this body and taken in everything it had. I think that at that time, it must be very exciting, right? Jian Wushuang pinched his chin and appeared to be very confident. With this body, why would he worry about not being able to move unhindered in the universe? Looking down on all 4 directions. At that moment, he did not know whether his future would be wonderful or not. However, in the depths of his soul realm, Jian Wushuang's consciousness body had an extremely wonderful expression. This guy? Are you serious? Jian Wushuang felt strange. For 1,000 years, he had been looking at the remnant soul of Zenith Heaven, like a diligent old cow that had been plowing the land. He had been controlling his body, trying every possible way to increase his strength. Jian Wushuang's consciousness form was even more certain that it was the right decision to stay dormant. Without this guy, how long would it take for his strength to improve so quickly? This remnant soul of Zenith Heaven was simply a gift from the heavens to help him increase his strength. Of course, the premise of all this was that he was a perfect life form that was as rare as phoenix feathers and Qilin horns in the universe. It was also because the Tarot sword spirit did not have a complete understanding of perfect life forms. In this soul realm, as a perfect life form, he only needed to think and he could directly start to fight back against the remnant soul of the sword spirit of Tarot, or even kill it. Once the remnant soul was killed, everything that Jian Wushuang comprehended from the remnant soul of Tarot would be taken over by Jian Wushuang without any hindrance, without any discomfort. This was because it was something that he had comprehended from his own body, outside the soul realm. Yes, I've almost reached the peak of this body in all aspects. I just need to make the next breakthrough when the conditions are right. Jian Wushuang held his chin and thought for a while, then said to himself, "Hehe, it's about time to go out. But before that, we can't leave these things behind." Thinking of this, Jian Wushuang went straight to the 4th floor and put the Tarot sword manual into his interspatial ring. Then, he went to the 3rd and 2nd floor again, and put countless divine medicines, divine materials, and treasures into his interspatial ring. However, at the 1st level, Tarot's remnant soul had only collected 5 universe origin stones, which was about 50 million pieces. This made Jian Wushuang's consciousness body in his soul realm sigh in pity. At the same time, he had already made preparations. As soon as the soul fragment left the spatial rift, he would immediately kill it and regain control of his body. 3 days later, Taro's remnant soul drove Jian Wushuang's body to the two statues on the 5th level. I've been here for hundreds of chaos cycles. I've finally found a suitable body and left this damned place. Jian Wushuang laughed and pressed his palm on the head of the statue on the left. Boom! 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 In an instant, a huge vortex that looked like a black hole appeared in the void. Jian Wushuang took a heavy step forward and shot toward the huge whirlpool while laughing wildly. Inside the Taro ruins, on the bank of a river, two forces were in a confrontation. Rather than a confrontation, it would be more appropriate to call it a hunt. On one side was a hunting team formed by 6 ultimate rulers. They specialized in hunting down lone or weak ultimate rulers in the Taro ruins, similar to Divine Emperor Thousand Leaves and Ruler Violet Eye. On the other side, there were 2 ultimate rulers who were alone. Their divine bodies were riddled with holes, and they seemed to be on the verge of collapse. If the 6 ultimate rulers who were surrounding them didn't seem to be afraid, they would have swarmed forward and killed the 2 ultimate rulers. Star Ruler, Heavenly Ruler, hand over the divine cold iron stone, and we can guarantee that we'll let you 2 go. A big man with 2 hammers in his hands and a small braid on the back of his head said. When the 2 people who were being hunted heard this, it was as if they had heard a funny joke, and they could not help but laugh loudly. Ha 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 ha. Agalar, you're better off using these words to deceive ghosts. The Star Ruler spoke disdainfully. He understood that if the hunting team had not been worried that he would destroy the divine cold iron stone before he died, they would have killed the 2 of them long ago. Why would they waste so much time talking to them? If they really did as they were told and obediently handed over the divine cold iron stone, they would immediately face a storm of attacks. Humph, you don't know what's good for you. Immediately, the big man with the pigtails' face darkened, and he said with killing intent, Since that's the case, Star Ruler, Heavenly Ruler, don't blame us for being ruthless. Kill! In an instant, this hunting team of 6 ultimate rulers turned into 6 divine beams of light and shot toward the 2. Rumble! At this moment, the sky and earth suddenly changed color. It was as if the void had been torn apart. At first, it was a small black dot. Then, the black dot gradually expanded and turned into a huge vortex full of black clouds and lightning. I've finally come out. A maniacal laugh suddenly rang out. The hunting team that had turned into 6 divine rays and was charging toward the Star Ruler and the Heavenly Constellation Ruler stopped in their tracks. They raised their heads and looked at the vortex in shock. The Star Ruler and the Constellation Ruler could not help but raise their heads to look at the sky. Whoosh! A black stream of light shot out from the black vortex and stopped in front of them with a loud laugh. Who is this? The hunting squad, Star Ruler, and Heavenly Constellation were all shocked. They had never heard of anyone who could tear open space in the Taro ruins, let alone walk out of it. The black light gradually dissipated, revealing a black-robed young man with a cold expression. Who is he? The fluctuations of divine power on his body seemed to be. He seems to only be a 4th-stage chief ruler. The 8 of them were all puzzled. They had been shocked, but when they realized that this young man only had the cultivation of a 4th-level ruler, they began to calm down. Keek. It's been hundreds of chaos cycles. I finally get to breathe some fresh air. The black-clothed young man stretched his back lazily, then stuck out his tongue and greedily licked the corner of his mouth. He was Jian Wushuang, who was being controlled by the Taro Divine Sword. Kid, who are you? A cold snort suddenly sounded. Jian Wushuang turned his head and saw a big man with 2 giant hammers in his hands. He had a small braid on the back of his head and was looking at him with an unfriendly expression. Seeing this, Jian Wushuang's face turned cold and he said, Aunt, are you talking to this lord? The man with the pigtails immediately began to laugh in anger, and the other rulers all had strange expressions on their faces. You, a trifling chief ruler of the 4th level, dare to call me an aunt? The big man with the plaited beard's eyes flickered with a ferocious light. Although he did not know where the black-robed young man had come from, he knew that he had a solid cultivation base. A mere 4th-level ruler was not even worth his time. Oh? From the looks of it, you want to make a move on me? Do you know whose territory this is? Jian Wushuang laughed sinisterly as a strange fire danced in his eyes. You're just pretending. The big man with pigtails snorted coldly, raised the giant hammer with both hands, and smashed it down on Jian Wushuang's head. Die! The heavenly ruler and the star ruler could not help but sigh in their hearts when they saw this. The two of them were supposed to die without a doubt, but they did not expect that someone would die before them. How would a firefly dare to compete with the bright moon? The corners of Jian Wushuang's mouth curved into a cruel arc, and he laughed in a low voice. That's good. I'll use your blood to bear witness to my name, Wushuang Sword Demon. Clang. In an instant, Jian Wushuang drew his sword and a sword essence that did not belong to Jian Wushuang burst out. A demonic blood-like red light slashed out from the divine sword Wuxia and struck the big man with pigtails. At this moment, the 8 people present seemed to hear the cries of a god and the mourning of the heavenly Tao. It was not Jian Wushuang's power, but the power of the Tarot Divine Sword itself. This power, how is that possible? The big man with the pigtails roared in disbelief and raised his hammers to block. However, before he could finish his sentence, the red light suddenly cut through his body. A strange scene happened. The big man with pigtails was not cut in two by the sword. Instead, his majestic body quickly shriveled at a speed visible to the naked eye. In just a few breaths, the man with the pigtails had all his divine power sucked dry by the sword and turned into a dried corpse. A gust of cold wind blew past, and the big man's divine body turned into countless pieces of dust, flying away with the wind. With a single sword strike, the ultimate ruler was completely annihilated in body and soul. Hiss! When the 7 people present saw this, they all sucked in a breath of cold air, their faces full of horror as if they had seen a ghost. They looked at Jian Wushuang in shock and saw that after Jian Wushuang had sucked the divine power of the man with pigtails dry, his pale face suddenly turned red. What kind of monster is this? The 5 members of the hunting team looked at each other and could see the raging waves in each other's eyes. They knew the strength of the big man with the pigtails very well. He was not an invincible ultimate ruler, but he was a genuine peak ultimate ruler. But in the end, he had been killed by a ruler of the 4th level with a single sword strike. The taste of divine power is really delicious. Jian Wushuang let out a deep and grim smile. Then, he looked at the remaining 5 rulers of the hunting team again, and a touch of greed flashed in his eyes. Come on. Let's be souls under my sword and witness the power of my name, Wushuang Sword Demon. Boom! With a loud bang, the battle broke out. If Jian Wushuang's original body faced the 5 ultimate rulers at the same time, it would not be so easy to win. Unfortunately, they were now facing the Tarot Divine Sword that had intimidated the Starry Sky 10,000 years ago. Even King Zhufeng's team and the Taishu Divine Sun, Qing Shuzi, had fallen at the hands of the Tarot Divine Sword. From this, one could see how powerful the Tarot Divine Sword was. Waves of evil and overbearing power flowed out. The 5 ultimate rulers did not have much capital to fight back. They did not even have the chance to escape. In just a moment, the 5 ultimate rulers were all killed by Jian Wushuang. Jian Wushuang's face turned red, looking even more evil. There are still 2 little bugs. Jian Wushuang bent his waist and slowly turned his head to look at the star ruler and the heavenly ruler. He stuck out his scarlet tongue and licked the corners of his mouth greedily. Before, Senior, we have no intention of offending you. When the star ruler and the heavenly ruler saw this, a chill ran up their spines and up to their heads. Even their teeth were chattering in fear. How could this be a ruler of the 4th level? Could a 4th level chief ruler kill an ultimate chief ruler as easily as slaughtering pigs and dogs? Unintentionally offended? Jian Wushuang sneered and walked toward the 2 of them. A demonic and overbearing sword intent enveloped the area under their feet. The star ruler and the heavenly ruler could not even move their feet under this demonic and overbearing sword intent. Just as Jian Wushuang was about to stretch out his big hand and press on their heads, all of a sudden, Jian Wushuang suddenly covered his head. His facial features were extremely distorted and he roared in pain. Impossible! How can you not be dead? In the depths of Jian Wushuang's soul realm, his real consciousness slowly opened his eyes and said calmly, Tarot, it's time to return my body. At this moment, the tarot sword spirit was aghast to find that he was gradually losing control of this body. All the divine power in his body seemed to have betrayed him, and he couldn't use any of it. Ah! Jian Wushuang clutched his head. His expression was twisted because of the pain, and his mouth emitted a terrifying sound wave that did not seem human. What's going on? The star ruler and the heavenly ruler shuddered upon seeing this, and they exchanged glances. Something must have happened to this monster. Don't worry about him. Let's run. The two of them made a decision in an instant. Seeing that the demonic sword intent that was suppressing them was gradually weakening, they immediately took a heavy step forward and broke free from the restrictions. They quickly shot into the distance without looking back. The sword spirit of Tarot, who was controlling Jian Wushuang's body, didn't have the time to care about this. He knelt on the ground, scratched his face, and kept howling in pain. No! I am the Tarot sword spirit. Jian Wushuang, you can't kill me. Jian Wushuang's face was filled with fear. He realized that his body was gradually losing control, and his consciousness was fading away at an extremely fast speed. Jian Wushuang's soul realm was like a battlefield where two armies were facing each other. On one side was Jian Wushuang's consciousness, and on the other side was the Tarot sword spirit. The sword spirit of Tarot, which had originally corroded more than half of Jian Wushuang's soul, was quickly annihilated at the speed of the receding tide. In his soul realm, the consciousness body that was condensed by Jian Wushuang's consciousness said, Sword spirit? You're just a remnant of Supreme Tarot's that was attached to the Tarot sword after his death. Even if the real Supreme Tarot were here, it would be impossible for him to possess me. I've already possessed you, and I've completely destroyed your soul. Why didn't you die? In Jian Wushuang's soul realm, there was a dark golden demon sword that was making a terrifying sound. This was the Tarot sword spirit. Jian Wushuang's expression was calm. He naturally would not explain the unique immortal body of a perfect creature to him. He said indifferently, Sword spirit, you should never have chosen to possess me. If you had completely absorbed my divine power back then, you might have really succeeded. Unfortunately, there are no what-ifs in this world. So, annihilate. As Jian Wushuang pressed down with his right hand, in an instant, countless divine power surged towards the dark golden demon's sword in his soul realm. No! The sword spirit was horrified. If someone saw Jian Wushuang at that moment, they would definitely be dumbfounded. Jian Wushuang was half kneeling on the ground with both hands supporting him. His face seemed to be changing. At one moment, his expression became twisted and crazy, and at the next moment, it became calm and cold. The two expressions switched quickly, as if there were two different personalities fighting for his body. It was as if there were two people conversing in his throat. At times, he would emit a terrifying sound wave that did not seem human. At other times, he would be calm and composed, as if he was talking about something that was logical. After the time for one incense stick to burn, Jian Wushuang's expression calmed down completely. He sat down cross-legged and slowly closed his eyes. The next moment, I'm Jian Wushuang. Jian Wushuang suddenly opened his eyes. The emptiness and strange fire in his eyes had disappeared. In their place was a calm as the deep sea. The Tarot sword spirit only lasted for a moment before it was completely destroyed by his soul consciousness. Jian Wushuang had also absorbed all the memories of the sword spirit of Tarot. Jian Wushuang also completely understood what kind of existence the Tarot sword spirit was. The spirit of the Tarot sword had been formed from a strand of baleful remnant left behind by ruler Tarot after his death hundreds of chaos cycles ago. As time slowly passed, 10,000 years ago, the evil spirit gradually gained its own consciousness. It took control of the Tarot divine sword on the 5th floor and became the Tarot sword spirit. The Tarot divine sword, under the nourishment of this evil energy, slowly became a complete demonic sword. With the birth of self-consciousness, ambition was like a seed buried in the soil, gradually taking root and sprouting. The tarot sword spirit was no longer willing to live in the tarot ruins. He wanted to reach the peak of the universe again and take back the glory that belonged to him. Thus, 10,000 years ago the tarot ruins appeared. Rather than saying that the tarot ruins had been discovered by someone, it was more appropriate to say that the tarot sword spirit had intentionally controlled its appearance. For a time, the entire universe was in turmoil. All the major powers sent their top experts over. The spirit of the tarot sword was afraid that a supreme would discover his existence. He also knew that if a supreme entered the ruins, he would not be able to take over or control it. Thus, he set the threshold to the ruler level. Thus, all the top rulers entered, and he chose King Zhufeng. As a result, he had taken over King Zhufeng's body and used the power of the tarot divine sword to devour and kill King Zhufeng's team. Unfortunately, although King Zhufeng was one of the best among the ultimate rulers, his talent did not satisfy him at all. He knew that with King Zhufeng's talent, it was impossible for him to reach the top of the universe. Therefore, he continued to wait until the battle between Jian Wushuang and Qing Shuzi. The explosion of 300,000 rays of sword qi had completely attracted him. Jian Wushuang and Qing Shuzi had entered the second level of the tarot ruins as he had guessed and walked to his side. He had calculated every step accurately, but he had not calculated the secret of Jian Wushuang being a perfect creature. In the end, everything he had done had been in vain. He had helped Jian Wushuang in vain. I was just lucky this time. Jian Wushuang raised his head and laughed bitterly. Even he could not help but feel lucky. If he had not made the decision to go into hiding when he was being possessed and pretended to be completely possessed by the sword spirit, then his divine power would have been completely sucked dry by the sword spirit and he would have died in the second layer of the tarot ruins. However, even though it was dangerous this time, the harvest was equally huge. At the thought of this, Jian Wushuang could not hold back the joy in his eyes. It could be said that this encounter was no different from a great fortune for him. He could clearly feel that his comprehension of the origin of sword principle had greatly improved. He had already reached the third level, which was comparable to the supreme experts who were good at sword principle. Moreover, the origin of sword principle contained in the nine-leaf swordgrass had not completely disappeared. With the origin of sword principle contained in the nine-leaf swordgrass, Jian Wushuang could make further progress. As for his comprehension of the laws of the universe, as well as the increase in the grade of the Weeping Wu divine sword, there was no need to mention it. Although Jian Wushuang had not broken through to the fifth level of ruler, his strength had greatly improved. With the help of the sword spirit of tarot, his strength had made a huge leap. If he were to meet Qing Shuzi again, Jian Wushuang was sure that he would not need to run anymore. He only needed to perform the dragon-destroying secret skill and he could easily compete with Qing Shuzi. It was even hard to say who would win. In other words, with Jian Wushuang's current fighting power, he was almost invincible without exposing his trump cards. Once he used some of his trump cards, such as the dragon-destroying secret skill and his gifted divine power, he would definitely be an invincible expert among the ultimate rulers. Among the rulers, the only one who could be stronger than him was probably a heaven-defying monster like the Nine Tribulations King. Besides, compared to the increase in power, what really made Jian Wushuang ecstatic was the tarot divine sword in his divine body. Jian Wushuang looked inside his body and saw a dark golden divine sword floating in his divine body. The blade was covered with mysterious runes and there was a vertical eye on the hilt. This was the great killing weapon that had shocked the universe, the tarot divine sword. This is a universe treasure that can make even a ruler go crazy. Jian Wushuang sighed slightly. He had not expected that the greatest opportunity of the tarot ruins would fall into his hands by chance. Xian! Jian Wushuang growled and the divine power in his body surged. He immediately forced the tarot divine sword out of his body. Waves of destructive pressure that could destroy the stars were released from the tarot divine sword, and the space around it twisted and shattered. The sword's power was too terrifying. Jian Wushuang estimated that if he could fully activate the sword's power, it would be enough to kill an ordinary supreme. Jian Wushuang could not imagine how powerful Tarot Supreme had been when he had held this divine sword. It was a pity that Jian Wushuang could not activate the Tarot Divine Sword at all. His vast divine power, after entering the Tarot Divine Sword, was like a clay ox entering the sea, unable to even cause a ripple. He would probably only be able to use 1/10,000th of the Tarot Sword's power when he reached the 5th level of the Ruler Realm or the Ultimate Ruler Realm. Jian Wushuang could not help but feel disappointed. Fine. If I can control the power of the Tarot Sword now, it'll make me dependent on it, which will be bad for my future growth. Jian Wushuang shook his head. Although he was disappointed, he was not too dejected. Just as Jian Wushuang was about to put the Tarot Divine Sword into his interspatial ring, he was stunned. You can't put it in. He discovered that the interspatial ring could not contain the Tarot Sword at all. If he tried to melt it by force, the interspatial ring would only be torn apart by the destructive sword intent of the Tarot Sword. This is a little troublesome. Jian Wushuang's eyes flickered. The Tarot Divine Sword was famous, and it was inevitable that people in the universe would know about it. If he were to wander around with the Tarot Divine Sword, it would be no different from lighting a lantern in the toilet. He would be courting death. Jian Wushuang understood the principle that a man's wealth would make him guilty. I remember that there is a God-sealing vine on the 2nd level of the Tarot Ruins. It was placed in the interspatial ring by the sword spirit of the Tarot Sword. That God-sealing vine can seal all the aura of a supreme treasure. Jian Wushuang thought for a while, and his eyes suddenly lit up. Sure enough, he found an ancient and vast vine in the interspatial ring. Speaking of which, Jian Wushuang's interspatial ring could be said to be filled with all kinds of treasures. In addition to the 5 small mountains of universe origin stones, there were also countless top divine medicines and divine materials. Although the God-sealing vine was a rare treasure in the outside world and could be used to refine a top-grade cardinal treasure of principles, it was just an ordinary divine material in Jian Wushuang's interspatial ring. Seal! Jian Wushuang shouted. In a split second, the ancient vine expanded and wrapped around the Tarot Divine Sword, leaving only the hilt exposed. The sharp and destructive aura of the Tarot Divine Sword instantly disappeared. From a distance, it looked like an ordinary ancient sword. Seeing this, Jian Wushuang could not help nodding in satisfaction and carried it on his back. Next, I should comprehend the Tarot Sword Manual. But before that, there are some things I have to deal with. Jian Wushuang muttered to himself. Then, he looked in a certain direction in the distance, and a murderous intent flashed in his eyes. The Star Ruler and the Heavenly Ruler must die. Otherwise, he would not be at ease. Even though he knew that the Star Ruler and the Heavenly Ruler did not know much about him and only knew that he had come from a crack in the void, if the two of them leaked this information, it was inevitable that some people would be able to speculate. At that time, Jian Wushuang might be in great danger. Although it was just Jian Wushuang's speculation, he wanted to kill the possibility of it being 1 in 10,000. Bang! Jian Wushuang stomped his right foot heavily and his entire body soared into the sky immediately. He chased after the Star Ruler and the Heavenly Ruler in the direction where they had escaped. Boom! Jian Wushuang stepped on the sky, one step faster than the other. Finally, his whole body suddenly turned into a thunderbolt between heaven and earth. High up in the sky, the strong wind was intense. The Star Ruler and the Heavenly Ruler were rushing forward. They only heaved a sigh of relief when they were several thousand kilometers away from the riverbank. Something must have happened to that monster. It probably won't be able to catch up for a while. The Star Ruler rejoiced. Star Ruler, there's always a way out. We thought that we would die without a doubt, but we didn't expect that we would be lucky enough to survive. People often say that one is bound for good fortune after surviving a great disaster. I think our opportunity will soon arrive. Heavenly Ruler replied with a smile. Having escaped death, his mood could not help but improve, and he even had the mood to joke. The Star Ruler nodded before shaking her head again. A wisp of worry surged in her eyes. It's best that we don't celebrate too early. That monster is a little strange. It might chase after us. Oh! Upon hearing this, Heavenly Ruler recalled the scene when Jian Wushuang had slaughtered the hunting team. His eyes turned grave as he said, Star Ruler, what should we do next? The star ruler thought for a moment and took a deep breath. A glint of determination flashed through their eyes. Heavenly ruler, let's spread the news about the monster. After all, the monster tore open space in the ruins, which means that there might be another entrance to the Tarot ruins. I believe that there will be people in the ruins who will be interested in it. At that time, I'm sure that the monster will be busy with its own affairs. How will it have the time to care about us? The heavenly ruler immediately nodded in agreement. Let's go, the star ruler continued. I remember that the Lord Jinan is in the south. We can tell him this news first. With his personality, I'm sure he'll be interested. The star ruler said as she made her way to the south of the Tarot ruins. A hint of retreat had already appeared in his eyes. He had already made up his mind to leave the Tarot ruins after this. There were fewer and fewer treasures appearing in the Tarot ruins, and the competition was getting more and more intense. An ultimate ruler with ordinary strength like him had no place to stand, so he might as well leave. At this moment, someone suddenly patted his shoulder. Heavenly ruler, what are you doing? The star ruler thought that it was the heavenly ruler who had slapped him and turned around. However, when he turned around, his entire body froze as if he had been struck by lightning. Behind him, a cold figure in black was staring at him expressionlessly. Where are you guys planning to go? A ghostly voice sounded. It's you. The star ruler's body turned cold and her eyes almost fell out of their sockets. Why did this monster come so quickly? Where were you planning to go when you ran away so quickly? Jian Wushuang, who was a head taller than him, looked down at him and said with a faint smile. The star ruler took a deep breath and thought of something. She rolled her eyes and laughed drily. Before senior, I'm just going to walk around and then leave the Tarot ruins. I don't plan on going anywhere. Is that so? Jian Wushuang squinted his eyes and said non-committally. Of course, there are many ultimate rulers in the Tarot ruins, and I'm just one of the most insignificant ones. I know my own limits and won't continue to get involved. The star ruler cowered and laughed drily. He had long been frightened out of his wits by the scene of Jian Wushuang, who was controlled by the sword spirit of Tarot, killing 6 ultimate rulers by himself. Now that he saw Jian Wushuang, he did not dare to resist at all. Star ruler, let's go. I've already sent a message to Lord Jinan. The heavenly ruler's voice suddenly drifted over from the front. The Lord Jinan has never been patient. Let's not waste any more time. What if the monster comes after us? The heavenly ruler's voice continued. In an instant, Star Ruler's mouth opened wide. He stretched out a trembling finger and pointed at Heavenly Ruler's back while shaking his head at Jian Wushuang. Before senior, let me explain what Lord Jinan and King of the North. I don't even understand what he's saying. The Star Ruler's forehead was covered in cold sweat as he explained to Jian Wushuang in a panic. However, before he could finish, the Heavenly Ruler, who was walking in front and did not get a response, continued to speak in confusion. Star Ruler, what's the matter with you? You were the one who suggested going out to find Lord Jinan and tell him about the monster. Why are you stopping now? The Star Ruler's body went limp upon hearing this. In the next moment, he noticed that Jian Wushuang was frowning slightly and there was killing intent in his eyes. He was so angry that the veins on his forehead bulged. He looked at the back of the Heavenly Ruler fiercely and shouted, Heavenly Ruler, when did I say such a thing? I don't even know who that Lord Jinan is, and I'm still going to find him? Don't you talk nonsense and make slanderous accusations. The Star Ruler's words were so awe-inspiring and powerful that even Jian Wushuang almost believed it. The Heavenly Ruler, who was walking in front, was startled by this thunderous roar and immediately quivered. Then, a trace of anger appeared on his face. He turned his head and angrily said, Star Ruler, have you been possessed? You don't even remember what you said. You. Before he could finish his sentence, his eyes widened and he was dumbstruck. The words in his mouth became unconsciously repeated. A black-robed, black-haired youth stood next to the Star Ruler. His hands were clasped behind his back as he looked at the Star Ruler from a distance. When did this monster come? The next moment, The heavenly ruler suddenly came back to her senses, and her lips trembled as she said, Senior, this has nothing to do with me. It was that star ruler guy who incited me to find Lord Jinnan, saying that he wanted to make your matter public. Before Jian Wushuang could say anything, the star ruler's vision turned black and he almost fainted from anger. Heavenly ruler, you should die. The star ruler's divine power surged as he bristled with rage. Jian Wushuang finally spoke. It does not matter whether you went to find Lord Jinnan or not, and it does not matter which one of you suggested it, because the result will be the same. Clang. The sound of a sword rang through the sky. The divine sword Wu Qi appeared in Jian Wushuang's hand in an instant, and a cold light flashed in his eyes. Stop fighting, you two. Die together. Boom. In an instant, Jian Wushuang pulled out his sword and a dazzling red light, like a galaxy, slashed toward the star ruler and the heavenly ruler. Heavenly ruler, do it! The star ruler roared as he watched the sword that was sweeping toward him. Rip! He did not dare to hold back. With a flip of his hand, a star river map appeared in front of him. The star river map expanded in the wind, and in just a few breaths, it had reached the point where it could cover the sky and the sun. The 18 stars in the star river map were connected together, forming an extremely strong defense. Even an invincible ultimate ruler would not be able to break it in a short time. In the chaos cycles which he had been in possession of the galaxy map, it had saved his life countless times during critical moments. It could be said that it was precisely because of the star river map that the star ruler, who was only an ordinary ultimate ruler, dared to venture into the Tarot remains. However, the star chart was already riddled with holes and could shatter at any moment. Even the star ruler was not sure how much defensive power was left. The star river map had saved the star ruler too many times. It was already beyond its limits. The star ruler clenched his fists as he looked at the blood-red sword radiance that was like a galaxy. He turned his head to look at the star chart in front of him and muttered to himself, Old friend, please help me one last time. You have to get through this. Whoosh! In an instant, the blood-red sword radiance struck the star river map at an extremely fast speed. Ka-ka-ka. In an instant, the sword light was slightly blocked and was in a stalemate with the star river map. The star river map, on the other hand, let out an unpleasant cracking sound. Seeing this, Jian Wushuang's eyes flickered and he raised his eyebrows. He was carrying 2 divine swords on his back at the same time. Although he had only pulled out the Weeping Wu divine sword, it had already been upgraded to the limit of a principal's cardinal treasure. His sword Dao universe origin had also entered the 3rd realm, and the laws of the universe had also increased greatly. Although Jian Wushuang was still a ruler of the 4th level, his strength was no longer what it used to be. According to common sense, an ordinary ultimate ruler would be killed in an instant when facing Jian Wushuang. He did not expect that the star ruler could block his sword with the star river map in his hand. This star river map seems to be a supreme-grade defensive treasure. However, the internal structure of this star river map has been severely damaged. It would not last more than a few strikes. Jian Wushuang shook his head slightly. He looked at the star ruler and swung his sword again. It's a pointless struggle. Boom! The Weeping Wu divine sword trembled hundreds of billions of times in an instant, and a voice similar to the weeping of gods and the chanting of Buddhas and demons came from the Weeping Wu divine sword. A blood-red sword light that was 100 times stronger than before slashed out again. This sword seemed to tear a hole in the sky. The huge star river map, which covered the sky, cracked like a spider web under this sword. Kacha-kacha. Cracks began to spread on the star river map as if it was going to be torn apart. Bang, bang, bang. The 18 connected stars on the star chart exploded one after another. In the end, under the star ruler's horrified gaze, the star river map collapsed and exploded into countless pieces. On the other hand, the blood-colored sword's radiance that was like a lightning that could tear apart the night sky slashed toward the star ruler once again. No! The sword shattered the star ruler's divine body with a furious roar and destroyed his body and soul. The current Jian Wushuang might not be able to compete with the 9 Tribulations King, but he could definitely be considered as one of the giant arms of the ultimate rulers. There's still one more. Jian Wushuang's expression did not change at all after killing Star Ruler. He looked indifferently at Heavenly Ruler in the distance. Run! In terms of power, the Heavenly Ruler was not as strong as the Star Ruler. When he saw that the Star Ruler was killed by Jian Wushuang with only 2 slashes, he did not dare to fight anymore. In an instant, he shot off into the distance. Jian Wushuang's expression was calm. With a light tap of his toes, he instantly crossed 1,000 miles and appeared behind the Heavenly Ruler. He used his fingers as a sword and slashed at the Heavenly Ruler's head. Lord Jinan, come and save me. I have a big secret to tell you. Die! The Heavenly Ruler used all his strength to shout. You're looking for death. A cold light flashed in Jian Wushuang's eyes. His 2 fingers were like swords as he ruthlessly hacked at Heavenly Ruler's head. Buzz! There was no resistance at all. A blood line appeared between the eyebrows of Heavenly Ruler. Then, Heavenly Ruler's divine body broke from the middle and was directly split into 2 by Jian Wushuang's finger. This was not the end. Jian Wushuang's eyes were cold and an extremely sharp and overbearing sword essence burst out from his hand. Once again, it crushed every part of Heavenly Ruler's divine power into ashes. The Heavenly Ruler had been completely annihilated. After doing all this, Jian Wushuang stood with his hands behind his back and his expression was uncertain. He did not expect that, in the end, this person would still leak the news. Forget it. I don't think the Lord Jinan would be able to guess anything based on what he said. Even if he did notice something, it doesn't matter. At most, we'll just fight. Jian Wushuang shook his head and stopped thinking about it. Anyway, with his current strength, even if he were to face the Lord Jinan, he might not be able to defeat him, but he was sure that he was definitely not weaker than the Lord Jinan. The most important thing right now is to improve my strength. As long as I'm strong enough. So what if everyone knows that I have a big secret? Jian Wushuang's eyes flickered. Then he took a step forward and went far away. At the same time, in a palace not far away, Lord Jinan was dressed in a blood-red robe. His hair tied into a small braid hanging loosely on his back. His eyes were slightly closed, and he was sitting on the main seat with his bare feet. A spear-wielding guard in heavy armor stood respectfully below him. This divine armor guard was the last remaining divine armor guard who had besieged the 9 Tribulation King 1,000 years ago. Your Highness, I just heard the voice of the Heavenly Ruler saying that he has a great secret to tell you, the guard said. Lord Jinan slowly opened his eyes and said, This king heard it as well, and this king can also sense that Heavenly Ruler and Star Ruler's auras have already disappeared. They must have been killed to silence them. The divine armor guard raised his head in confusion. Your Highness, could it be that Heavenly Ruler's message about the secret he wanted to tell us was true? But with his strength, what big secret could he possibly know? Don't underestimate anyone. There are many opportunities in the Tarot ruins. Who knows what Heavenly Ruler and Star Ruler have found? Lord Jinan smiled and shook his head. He then stood up and said, Let's go and see Heavenly Ruler. Yes, the godly armor guard respectfully acknowledged. A moment later, the 2 of them arrived at the void where the Heavenly Ruler had fallen. Your Highness, the Heavenly Ruler has indeed fallen here. The divine armor guard could not help but tremble as he sensed the remnant energy of the Heavenly Ruler. The Lord Jinan did not reply. He squinted his eyes and muttered to himself in surprise. What a powerful aura of the Tao of the Sword. I don't think there's a ruler of the Tao of the Sword who is as powerful as this in these ruins. Lord Jinan's eyes flashed with a hint of thought. He could not help but think, could it be that Qing Shuzi has returned? As soon as this idea came out, he shook his head and denied it. Qing Shuzi's reputation was no less than his. Even though he had disappeared for more than 1,000 years, it was not to the extent that the 2 of them did not know him. If it was Qing Shuzi who was after them, they would have told him their names. Presumably, the person who had killed the Star Ruler and Heavenly Rulers was not famous. Your Highness, what should we do now? The guard asked. Lord Jinan muttered to himself. Let's go back first. With such a powerful sword aura and the fact that he could easily kill Star Ruler and Heavenly Ruler, This person can't be weak. The fight for the opportunities in the Tarot ruins has just begun. I will have to deal with this kind of person sooner or later. Yes, the two of them gradually left. At the same time, in a remote corner far away from the central area of the Tarot ruins, Jian Wushuang was sitting cross-legged, and in front of his knees was the Tarot Sword Manual. This Tarot Sword Manual had a faint divine power fluctuation. Like a halo, it wrapped around the Tarot Sword Manual. These ripples of divine power had been left behind by Ruler Tarot all those years ago, and it was precisely because of these ripples of divine power that the Tarot Sword Manual had been able to remain undamaged even after hundreds of chaos cycles had passed. There are only 5 pages in total? Jian Wushuang frowned. The Tarot Sword Manual was not as thick and complicated as he had thought. There were only 5 pages in total, and each of the 5 pages corresponded to a sword principle superpower. In other words, this Tarot Sword Manual recorded a total of 5 Sword Dao divine abilities. Jian Wushuang used his divine power, stretched out his right hand, and flipped to the first page. An extremely strong resistance came from the sword code. Although this resistance was strong, it was not harmful. It was like a test to see if the reader had the strength to inherit his sword code. Seeing this, Jian Wushuang snorted coldly. Divine power surged from his hand and he immediately suppressed the resistance. He then turned to the first page. On the first page of the gold-stamped paper, there was a passage written with a sharp pen. It introduced the first divine ability of the Tarot Sword Manual. Light will be devoured by darkness. Living beings will walk towards the cold of midwinter, and the sun will eventually fall into the arms of the dark night. The world will then fall into the deepest darkness. This darkness, its name is Eternal Night. In an instant, the world in front of Jian Wushuang changed. Time seemed to accelerate, and everything around them was fading. Flowers and trees began to wither, and the vitality of all living creatures in the world was slowly fading away. The stars dimmed, and the world seemed to have become a thick gray. A moment later, the entire universe fell into an eternal night. A deathly, cold, lonely, and rigid aura filled the air. There was no longer any light in Jian Wushuang's eyes. The root of all this was because a figure with an unclear face and figure suddenly appeared in Jian Wushuang's mind and wielded a sword. All the darkness was the power of this sword. This strike could strip all life and bring eternal darkness to the world. The name of this sword was Eternal Night. In the blink of an eye, a year had passed. Jian Wushuang just looked at the Tarot Sword Manual and did not move at all, as if he had fallen into the deepest level of comprehension. In a 100-foot radius around him, streaks of pitch-black sword light rose up. Then, like a huge net, they intertwined together and formed a huge black ball that wrapped around Jian Wushuang, who sat cross-legged. Spring went and autumn came. The second year had passed. The black ball's color became darker and darker. Darkness even began to spread out, robbing everything around it of its vitality. Then it was the third year. Jian Wushuang had closed his eyes, and the area within 100 miles of him had turned into a cold, dead land covered in darkness. He was completely immersed in the deepest level of comprehension. In the center of his divine body, the 9-leaf sword grass with 7 leaves was melting and consuming at an extremely fast speed. Then, it turned into comprehension of sword principle and was completely absorbed by Jian Wushuang. The 4th year, the 5th year, the 6th year. At the end of the 7th year, Jian Wushuang finally opened his eyes. The moment Jian Wushuang opened his eyes, the darkness that covered hundreds of miles shattered with a bang. One sword to form a country, the kingdom of Eternal Night. A black light flashed across Jian Wushuang's eyes. After 7 years, with the help of the remaining energy of the 9-leaf sword grass, he finally comprehended the first sword superpower of the Tarot Sword Codex, Eternal Night. The stroke had far surpassed the level of a superpower and even subverted Jian Wushuang's understanding of sword principle. Jian Wushuang had never imagined that sword principle could be used in such a way. How was this sword a divine art? It was clearly the use and improvement of the divine kingdom of one thought, which could only be comprehended by supreme martial artists, on the sword Dao. It was the most profound, obscure, and esoteric stroke that Jian Wushuang had ever seen. Even with his amazing talent in sword principle, he had only comprehended a little bit of it in the past 7 years. Could be said that with Jian Wushuang's current achievements in sword principle, there was no way for him to fully comprehend the sword principle superpower. Jian Wushuang could not help but be amazed and admit that Tarot Supreme was indeed an invincible supreme who could dominate the starry sky and illuminate the ancient times. Jian Wushuang could not imagine how terrifying Supreme Tarot's comprehension of sword principle had been to be able to comprehend such a terrifying sword move. No wonder Tarot supremacy had been crowned as the unrivaled sword supremacy since ancient times. Even now, no one had been able to take away this title. For the first time, Jian Wushuang felt a sense of respect for Tarot supremacy, who dominated the universe with his sword. Such a powerful Tarot supremacy, coupled with the Tarot divine sword that can destroy stars. How heroic must he have been in the universe back then. But even so, he was still killed in the eternal sun star area. Even his holy kingdom was wiped out. Jian Wushuang sighed in disbelief. In the past 7 years, the more he comprehended the eternal night, the more he could feel how powerful Tarot supremacy was. He was definitely an invincible master who could crush the primordial era and make the starry sky submit to him. However, such an expert had actually been killed. Jian Wushuang could not help but feel how small he was and how vast the universe was. There is still a long way to go on the path of cultivation. Jian Wushuang shook his head and stopped thinking about these things that were far from related to him. In total, from the time we entered the second level of the Tarot ruins to the time we came out, plus these 7 years, more than 1,000 years have passed. I wonder how Divine Marquis Qingfeng and Ninth Culpa King are doing. Thinking of Divine Marquis Qingfeng and Ninth Culpa King, Jian Wushuang smiled. Back then, the 3 of them were hunted by Lord Jinan, the 5 Blood Nether emissaries, and the ruler Silver Rock in the Fengyang Canyon in order to fight for the divine medicine that could increase the chances of breaking through to the supreme level. In the end, they were forced to escape on their own. Now, he had returned alive, but he did not know how the 2 of them were. He should be fine. Even if he can't defeat Blood Hades' envoy, Ruler Silver Rock and Lord Jinan, he should be fine. As for Divine Marquis Qingfeng, no one went after him after I left. Unless something unexpected happens, he should be fine. Forget it. I'll find someone to inquire about it. Jian Wushuang's eyes flashed with a thoughtful look. Now that he had obtained all the biggest opportunities in the Tarot ruins and his strength had also improved greatly, there was no need for him to stay any longer. However, before he left, he had to say hello to these 2 old friends who came with him. While Jian Wushuang was thinking, suddenly, a few golden lights flashed across the sky. An ultimate ruler and 3 peak 5th stage rulers? Jian Wushuang raised his eyebrows. As the time it took for the Tarot ruins to appear grew longer and longer, the opportunities within the ruins were no longer limited to the ultimate rulers. Even some 5th stage rulers had come here. However, there were ultimate rulers everywhere in the Tarot ruins, and the lineup of this team was not enough to look at in the Tarot ruins. However, he could use this opportunity to inquire about the Ninth Culpa King and Divine Marquis Qingfeng. The next moment, Jian Wushuang turned over his right hand and changed into a loose black robe. The hood of the black robe covered half of his face, revealing only his chin. Then, he swept forward and came behind the 3 people in the sky. Everyone, where are you going in such a hurry? Jian Wushuang smiled. Among the 4, the leader was an old man with a mole between his eyebrows and a strong divine power. The other 2 were 5th-level rulers, a young man and a young woman. They looked reserved, but there was excitement and curiosity in their eyes. They seemed to be juniors who had followed this ultimate ruler to the Tarot ruins and had just gained more experience. Who is it? The wizardry elder was shocked and looked back. Seeing that Jian Wushuang's aura was only at level 4, he could not help but let down his guard. Then, he asked in confusion, "Young friend, may I ask why you've stopped us? Your Excellency, do you know about the Ninth Culpa King in the ruins?" Jian Wushuang asked. Before the wizardry elder could say anything, the girl behind him replied with excitement. "What a coincidence. Could it be that you're also going to look for the Ninth Culpa King?" "What? Jian Wushuang raised his eyebrows and replied with a smile. What's the matter? Are you also going to look for the ninth Culpa King? That's right. I heard that the ninth Culpa King is one of the most powerful beings in the ruins. We're planning to go and join him. The girl was quite playful. When she was halfway through her sentence, the wizened old man glared at her and scolded. Little Qing, didn't I tell you to be careful in the remains? Junior sister, how can you just say whatever you want? The young man beside the young girl said with a bitter smile. The young girl immediately shrank her head and replied in a low voice, I understand, master. The wizened elder snorted and nodded. He turned to Jian Wushuang and said, Young friend, to be honest, there are too many experts in the Taro ruins, and it's a habit to kill and plunder. It's difficult for us to gain a foothold here with our strength, so we're indeed planning to find an expert to rely on. I see that you're only a 4th-level ruler, and it'll be difficult for you to survive in the Taro ruins. If you also want to join the 9th Culpa King, you can go with us. Jian Wushuang smiled and replied, That's what I was thinking, so I'll have to trouble you. It's fine. The wizened old man waved his hand without a care. Then Jian Wushuang, the elder with eyes, and the other two flew away. They did not move very fast along the way. Perhaps it was because Jian Wushuang was only a ruler of the 4th level. The three of them did not guard against him too much. Therefore, they became familiar with each other after a while. From their conversation, Jian Wushuang gradually came to know the identities of the three people. The wizardry elder was known as the water sorcerer ruler. He was a veteran ultimate ruler who had lived through dozens of chaos cycles. In terms of power, he was also a peak ultimate ruler. He was much stronger than the star ruler and the heavenly ruler. The boy and girl were his disciples. The boy's name was Rangu, and the girl's name was Qingxi. The three of them came from a remote starfield, which could be considered an overlord in that starfield. However, it was obviously not enough to be placed in the Taro ruins. To them, it would be good if they could obtain some good fortune in the Taro ruins, but even if they could not, the water sorcerer ruler could bring his disciples to see the world. Water sorcerer ruler had originally brought a total of 3 disciples with him. However, 100 years ago, his eldest disciple had been killed by a team of ultimate rulers from a top force in the ruins. It was also this turn of events that made Water Sorcerer Ruler realize his own shortcomings, which was why he had decided to rely on the famous 9th Culpa King in the ruins. However, based on Jian Wushuang's understanding of the 9th Culpa King, these people's thoughts would probably be in vain. Bloodsword, now that there are various forces in the ruins, rulers like you and me with no background have no place to stand. If we don't join any forces, it will only become more and more difficult to survive. The young man named Rangu lowered his head and sighed. Perhaps it was because they saw that Jian Wushuang was also alone and his cultivation was not high. The young man named Rangu could not help but feel a bit of sympathy for him. Jian Wushuang smiled and did not refute. He agreed. Ruler Rangu is right. After a short pause, Jian Wushuang changed the topic and asked, Ruler Rangu, I have just arrived at the Taro ruins. May I ask what the situation is like inside? After some thought, Ruler Rangu replied, As the heavenly treasures in the ruins become less and less, the fight for them has become more and more intense. Those solitary experts, because they are all alone, have a hard time exploring the ruins, unless they are extremely powerful. Now, most of these solitary experts have joined forces and formed many camps. There are quite a few of these camps, and all of them have at least an almost invincible ultimate ruler. But in general, the 5 camps are still the leaders of the primordial ruin. 5 major camps? Jian Wushuang squinted his eyes. He did not expect that, in the 1,000 years that he had disappeared, the Taro ruins would change so quickly. The fight for the opportunities had reached the point where all parties had to join forces and form a camp. What Jian Wushuang did not know was that all of this was related to him killing the sword spirit of Taro. The appearance of the natural treasures in the ruins seemed to be random, but it was actually the deliberate arrangement of the sword spirit of Taro. Its purpose was to find the perfect target to possess. Now that the Taro sword spirit had been killed by him, naturally, there would be no new natural treasures. These 5 camps are all extremely powerful. The camp that is currently ranked first is the one led by Blood Sky Palace. Since the battle in Fengyang Canyon 1,000 years ago, Blood Sky Palace has sent another 4 Blood Nether emissaries to the Taro ruins. With the previous 5, there are a total of 9 Blood Nether emissaries. It can be said that no one in the ruins is a match for these 9 Blood Nether emissaries. In second place is the camp of the Defeng Divine Kingdom, which only came to the Taro ruins several hundred years ago. Their leader is the third prince, the ultimate ruler's undefeatable supreme expert. At the mention of Defeng Divine Kingdom, a look of unforgettable hatred appeared in ruler Ran Gu's eyes. When the cheeky girl, Xianxia, heard this, her face turned gloomy, and she said with a slightly choked voice, "Eldest senior brother was killed by the third prince's men because he had accidentally blocked the path of the Defeng Divine Kingdom." Hearing this, Jian Wushuang was silent. The road of cultivation was cruel, especially in the Taro ruins, where there were no rules and restrictions. Death was common. Water Sorcerer ruler did not say anything, but his fists were tightly clenched. The reason why he wanted to seek refuge with the 9th Culpa King and stay in the ruins was that he still had the thought of revenge, even though the hope seemed very slim. Ruler Ran Gu took a deep breath and continued. The third is the camp led by the 9th Culpa King, who is recognized as the strongest ruler in the ruins. By right, he could have become the number 1 camp in the ruins. Unfortunately, the 9th Culpa King is too proud and disdains to be in the same camp as others. He has not accepted anyone except for the ultimate ruler, Divine Marquis Qingfeng, who is under him. However, I've recently heard that the 9th Culpa King has plans to expand his power. It's also because of this that my master, junior sister, and I plan to try to rely on him. The remaining 2 forces are the ruler Silver Rock and Lord Jinan from the Defeng Divine Kingdom. The ruler Silver Rock is slightly weaker than the 9th Culpa King and the 3rd Prince of Dafeng. However, because his strength is not too heaven-defying and he does not have a strong background, many solitary experts in the Taro ruins are more willing to join his side. After all, the leaders of the previous camps were too powerful. If a heaven-defying opportunity was obtained, there was an 80% chance that it would be taken by the leaders. However, the ruler Silver Rock was different. His battle strength was not the strongest among the ultimate rulers. If you joined his camp and obtained a great opportunity, the ruler Silver Rock would not be able to monopolize it. He would have to share it with everyone. That's why the ruler Silver Rock has so many rulers under his command. At first, the few of us wanted to join him, but he had so many rulers under his command that he didn't even care about our power. As for Lord Jinan, it is said that his power suffered a great setback in the battle at Fengyang Canyon 1,000 years ago. He has been enduring for a long time, so there is no need to mention him. Jian Wushuang nodded. Hearing that Divine Marquis Qingfeng was with 9th Culpa King, he heaved a sigh of relief. After chatting for a while more, Xianxia's mood also recovered. She smiled and said jokingly, "You're quite bold, Bloodsword. You're only a 4th-level ruler, and yet you've dared to come to the Taro ruins." Jian Wushuang replied with a smile, "I didn't expect the ruins to be so dangerous before I came here. Bloodsword, since you're with us now, we'll definitely protect you." The young girl, Xianxia, patted Jian Wushuang's shoulder and snorted loudly. "However, with your strength, don't even think about joining the 9th Culpa King. He's the number 1 ultimate ruler in the entire universe. Even if he wants to expand his power and take in rulers, he'll be an ultimate ruler like my master. You're only a 4th-level ruler, so he'll definitely look down on you." Hearing this, Jian Wushuang could not help but laugh. However, he knew that the girl did not mean to belittle him, so he replied noncommittally, "What you said makes sense." "Of course." Hearing this, Xianxia snorted complacently. Then, as if she was afraid that Jian Wushuang would be depressed, she quickly comforted him. "You don't have to worry. As long as you follow us obediently, when my master enters the camp of the 9th Culpa King, he will naturally protect us. My master is the kindest." Jian Wushuang found it interesting and nodded with a smile. Water Sorcerer ruler, who was walking in front, noticed this scene and could not help but turn back to glare at Xianxia. "Little Qing, be careful with your words and actions. Be careful with your words and actions. After saying that, Water Sorcerer Ruler looked at Jian Wushuang and said with a faint smile, "However, it's a good fate for you to know us, young friend. If I can really enter the Ninth Kulpa King's camp, it's not impossible for me to protect you. I'll have to trouble you then, Water Sorcerer Ruler." Jian Wushuang smiled, but he sighed in his heart. From his observation, these three people were all kind-hearted people. This was naturally not a good thing, but in the Taro ruins, where killing and plundering had become a habit, it might not be a good thing. A few hours later, Jian Wushuang, Water Sorcerer Ruler, and the others arrived at the central area of the Taro ruins. "Little friend, that's where the Ninth Kulpa King is." Water Sorcerer Ruler pointed off into the distance at an endless mountain range, on top of which was an enormous palace. Jian Wushuang looked up and saw many rulers waiting outside the palace. They looked nervous. Most of them were ultimate rulers. Those rulers, are they all Ninth Kulpa King's men? Jian Wushuang withdrew his gaze and asked in confusion. Water Sorcerer Ruler shook his head and replied, "No, I think they're all like us. They heard the news and came here to seek refuge with the Ninth Kulpa King. After all, the killing in the Taro ruins is too crazy. If you're not strong enough and don't have a backer, you can't stand on your own. Let's go, we'll head over too." With that, Water Sorcerer Ruler led Jian Wushuang, Ruler Rangu, and Xianxia toward the palace. "Blood Sword, when the time comes, we just need to stand behind my master and not say anything. Everything will be handled by my master." Rangu walked beside Jian Wushuang and reminded him in a low voice. "All right," he said. Jian Wushuang nodded to show that he understood. A moment later, the four of them landed outside the palace. As soon as they landed, they could hear the discussion of the ultimate rulers. "What do you think the Ninth Kulpa King's sudden expansion of power and recruitment of the rulers of the ruins means?" "I don't know. Maybe the Ninth Kulpa King saw that the Third Prince and the ruler Silver Rock were both expanding their forces and felt a sense of crisis. The Ninth Kulpa King has always been arrogant. I'm afraid he won't be interested in ordinary ultimate rulers this time. Let's try. If we can't join the Ninth Kulpa King's forces, we can only rely on the ruler Silver Rock. But I heard that the ruler Silver Rock is narrow-minded. If we rely on him, I'm afraid we won't have a good time." Sigh. Many ultimate rulers were discussing in low voices. Then, they saw the sorcery god bring Jian Wushuang and the other two over, and they let out a soft gasp. "Eh? 2 5th-level chief rulers and even a 4th-level chief ruler? With your strength, you're here to join in the fun. Are you asking to be humiliated? Ha 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 ha. What a joke. With such strength, he should have left the Taro ruins. Staying here is just asking for death." At first, I was still a little uncertain about joining the Ninth Kulpa King's force. But with the help of these buggers, I suddenly became confident. Low sneers could be heard. The people present were all ultimate rulers, and they were mocking him without the slightest bit of fear. Xianxia and Ruler Rangu were instantly enraged, and even the water sorcerer's expression turned unsightly. "Master, they've gone too far." Xianxia clenched her fists and said in a low voice. Water Sorcerer Ruler took a deep breath upon hearing this, then said in a calm voice, "Let them say whatever they want. We just need to take care of ourselves." But Xianxia was about to say something else when the Water Sorcerer interrupted her with a firm voice. "No buts." Xianxia could only lower her head. Water Sorcerer Ruler could not help but let out a soft sigh upon seeing this. After some thought, he said, Only by joining the Ninth Kulpa King's camp can we have a place to protect ourselves in the Taro ruins. With this place, we can have a chance to avenge your eldest senior brother. So, let it be, as long as it doesn't affect our entry into the Ninth Kulpa King's camp." "I understand, Master." Hearing this, Xianxia still pulled a long face. Water Sorcerer Ruler did not say anything more. He glanced at Jian Wushuang, who was standing at the back with his head lowered, and shook his head. At the same time, in the palace, the Ninth Kulpa King stood in the middle of the hall with his hands behind his back. Divine Marquis Qingfeng was half a body's length behind him. The huge palace seemed a little empty. "Ninth Kulpa, Do you really plan to call upon the rulers to fight to the death with the ruler Silver Rock before you leave the ruins? Divine Marquis Qingfeng asked. A life and death battle? Is he even worthy? Upon hearing this, the ninth Kulpa King sneered expressionlessly. Then, his eyes flickered with a cold light and he said, "If it wasn't for the fact that he has so many rotten fish and shrimps around him, I would have killed him long ago. Why would I have kept him alive until now?" Divine Marquis Qingfeng smiled bitterly and shook his head. If only you had been willing to recruit the ultimate ruler in these ruins earlier, the Silver Rock wouldn't have been here. Don't you know that I've kept the ruler Silver Rock alive until now to wait for Jian Wushuang to come out so that we can take revenge together? If the Silver Rock hadn't ambushed me in Fengyang Canyon, how could Jian Wushuang have been chased by Qing Shuzi? After a pause, the ninth Kulpa King said with an indifferent expression, "Although we know that Jian Wushuang is still alive, there is no news from him. Let's take revenge for him together." Jian Wushuang was not dead. It was the ruler Bloodwave who had sent them the news. After all, the magic lamp that Jian Wushuang had left in the Divine Palace of Life was still lit. Although he was not dead, he had lost contact with them all these years. There was no news at all. It was obvious that he was not in a good situation. In fact, after Jian Wushuang's great change in the second level, his body was controlled by the sword spirit of the Tarot Divine Sword. For thousands of years, he naturally could not contact the outside world. And now Jian Wushuang had just come out. Let's go. Most of the Omega rulers who wish to join us have already arrived. All we need to do is select a few of the most elite of them, and then have you personally lead them. I imagine that should be enough to defeat ruler Silver Rockside. Divine Marquis Qingfeng said. The ninth Kulpa King nodded, and a hint of coldness flashed in his eyes. There were not many opportunities left in the Tarot ruins, and he still had not heard anything about the second level that King Zhufeng had mentioned. It was probably only King Zhufeng's guess. Now that things had come to this, there was no longer a need to stay in the Tarot ruins. But, before he left, it was time to settle some grudges. The Blood Nether emissaries, Lord Jinan, and the ruler Silver Rock will not be able to escape. Ninth Kulpa King's eyes glinted coldly. Divine Marquis Qingfeng followed closely behind him and strode out of the palace. A moment later, the two of them walked out of the palace, and the crowd immediately burst into a commotion. It's the ninth Kulpa King. The ninth Kulpa King has come out. The ninth Kulpa King is really strong. The divine power aura around his body is not on the same level as mine. The eyes of the ultimate rulers flashed with a hint of fervor. An expert would be respected and worshipped wherever he went, and the ninth Kulpa King was the well-deserved expert among the ultimate rulers. The ninth Kulpa King's expression did not change at all when he heard these exclamations. He glanced at the ultimate ruler outside the palace and said indifferently, "If you want to join my camp, you can. I only have one request, and that is to be able to take one of my palm strikes. Come, let me see your strength." After saying that, the ninth Kulpa King took a step forward. He stepped into the void and looked down at the rulers. When the many ultimate rulers heard this, they looked at each other, uncertain. They did not expect that the requirement to join the ninth Kulpa King's camp was to take a palm from him. This was far beyond their expectations. Among the ultimate rulers, the ninth Kulpa King's strength was comparable to that of the Supremes. Although they were also ultimate rulers, many of whom were top ultimate rulers, they were not sure if they could withstand one move from the ninth Kulpa King. The originally noisy crowd had become unusually quiet at this moment. For a moment, no one actually dared to take a move from the ninth Kulpa King. At the outermost part of the crowd, Jian Wushuang, who was dressed in a loose black robe with a hood covering most of his face, could not help but smile. The ninth Kulpa King was still as conceited as ever. Jian Wushuang muttered to himself and then he smiled. "What's wrong? There are so many of you here, yet none of you have the courage to take a single move from me." The ninth Kulpa King stepped into the void, looked down at the crowd, and said indifferently. As soon as he finished speaking, there was a commotion in the crowd. And then, a muscular ultimate ruler with a sledgehammer in his hand soared into the sky. "Ninth Kulpa King, I, The golden ape. Am here to experience it. This ultimate ruler's body was like an iron tower, and he gave off an extremely oppressive feeling. He raised his head and said with an arrogant expression, "Everyone says that the ninth Kulpa King is the strongest ruler, even comparable to a supreme. Today, I'll see if you, the ninth Kulpa King, are really that strong. You talk too much." The ninth Kulpa King was expressionless. He directly raised his palm and slapped down at the golden ape. Rumble. In an instant, countless divine powers surged and formed a giant palm that covered the sky. This palm covered the entire sky. In the face of this palm, the golden ape ruler was as small as an ant. "Take this palm and I'll allow you to join my camp." The ninth Kulpa King retracted his hand and stood with his hands behind his back, his expression indifferent. The giant palm was surging with power as it slammed down on the golden ape. "Break! Die!" The golden ape god bellowed in rage as it saw this palm strike that seemed as if the heavens were about to collapse. It raised its giant hammer and smashed it down. Waves of divine power gathered in his arms. The muscles on his arms twisted and twisted, emitting a terrifying power. Bang! This hammer and the ninth Kulpa King's palm collided together. A surge of divine power burst forth, causing the entire mountain range to shake. Ruler Golden Ape spat out a mouthful of blood as he was sent flying back. He crashed into the ground, creating a small crater in the mountain range. The light from the palm did not dim in the slightest. It was as if it had been stung by an ant as it continued to strike down at the golden ape. "No! This!" The golden ape was stunned. At this moment, he truly understood how great the difference in strength was between the ninth Kulpa King and an ordinary ultimate ruler like him. "He's too weak." The ninth Kulpa King shook his head and waved his hand. The huge palm in the sky gradually dissipated. "Carry it away, next one." The ninth Kulpa King retracted his gaze and looked at the others again. The entire place was silent, leaving only the sound of heavy breathing. They were simply scared out of their wits by the ninth Kulpa King's palm. It was too strong. Although the golden ape was not one of the top-tier ultimate rulers, it was still extremely powerful. Yet, it could not even take a single palm. This ninth Kulpa King's strength was on a completely different level from them. They could tell that if the ninth Kulpa King had not held back at the end, this palm would have been enough to kill the golden ape ruler. "No one else," the ninth Kulpa King said indifferently. No one in the crowd replied for a long time. After a long time, a middle-aged man wearing cloth clothes and straw shoes and holding a divine spear walked out of the crowd. "Ruler Spear River, I'm here to ask ninth Kulpa King for advice." The middle-aged man's expression was solemn. The divine spear in his hand was as white as a rainbow. He was extremely nervous. "Take my palm." The ninth Kulpa King did not say much. Just like before, he continued to slap down at Ruler Spear River. Swish! Ruler Spear River raised his head to look at the palm. He first took a deep breath, then let out an explosive roar and charged into the sky. Bang 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 bang. Die! A cold light exploded from Ruler Spear River's divine spear, and then he thrust it out like a dragon, striking out 789 times in succession. The spear shadows intertwined and stacked on top of each other like an impenetrable curtain of rain. They smashed onto the giant palm. A moment later, the power of the giant palm gradually dissipated, and the sky returned to its clear state. "I've embarrassed myself." Ruler Spear River landed on the ground, panting heavily, his forehead covered in sweat. The surrounding rulers who were watching the battle cast envious gazes at him. This person had taken the palm of the ninth Kulpa King, which meant that he could follow the ninth Kulpa King. In the future, he should be able to do whatever he wanted in the Taro ruins. However, there was not much joy on Spear River's face, only lingering fear. It was too difficult for him to receive the palm strike just now. It was an explosion that exhausted all the divine power in his body. But even so, he could only barely offset the power of this palm. One must know that this was just a casual palm strike from the ninth Kulpa King. He was not serious at all. The ninth Kulpa King was too terrifying. In the void, The ninth Kulpa King lowered his head and looked at him with a hint of approval in his eyes. He said indifferently, "It's not bad to be able to withstand this palm." Time passed slowly, and gradually many people came to challenge the ninth Kulpa King. However, most of them did not manage to withstand the palm of the ninth Kulpa King and had to leave in disappointment. Only a few of the more famous experts among the ultimate rulers were able to withstand the palm of the ninth Kulpa King. Rangu, take good care of little Qing. Master will be back soon. Water Sorcerer Ruler warned before taking a deep breath. With a determined look in his eyes, he strode toward the ninth Kulpa King. He knew that it was his turn. Be careful, Master. Rangu and Qingxi shouted worriedly from behind. When Water Sorcerer Ruler heard this, he stopped in his tracks. However, he did not turn back and continued walking toward the ninth Kulpa King. He knew that so many ultimate rulers, including some weaker peak ultimate rulers, could not withstand the palm of the ninth Kulpa King. Although he was also at the level of a peak ultimate ruler, he was not very strong. It would be very difficult for him to withstand the palm of the ninth Kulpa King. But, for the sake of his eldest disciple, he had to give it a try. A moment later, he walked to the feet of the ninth Kulpa King, cupped his hands and said, "Ninth Kulpa King, I'm Water Sorcerer. Please enlighten me." The ninth Kulpa King's expression did not change. He nodded and said, "Come on." Boom! With a loud explosion, the ninth Kulpa King raised his palm and slammed it down at Water Sorcerer Ruler. The surging godly power condensed and formed a giant palm that could cover the sky. Every palm print was clearly visible and filled with profound universe principles. This palm then came crashing down on Water Sorcerer Ruler. Water Sorcerer Ruler did not dare to relax in the slightest upon seeing this. He quickly formed seals with his hands and bellowed, "Water Dragon, rise!" Bang! In an instant, a powerful gust of wind exploded with him at the center. Water Sorcerer Ruler's hair and beard all flew up in the air as his eyes widened in rage. Roar! A dragon's roar was heard. Then, a dark blue water dragon rushed out of his divine body and bit at the giant palm that looked like a dark cloud. Pa! Like glass shattering, the water dragon formed from the Water Sorcerer God's divine power only lasted for 10 seconds before shattering. He's too weak. The ninth Kulpa King shook his head. Water Sorcerer Ruler completely ignored them. He did not even spare them a glance as he used all his strength to shout, "Gather for this old man!" Whoosh! 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 In an instant, the thousands of water droplets formed by the collapse of the water dragon seemed to be pulled by something. They gathered from all directions at the same time, twisted and fused, and finally formed a huge, thick wave of water. Immediately after, this wave of water once again pressed toward the ninth Kulpa King's giant palm. Bang! Accompanied by a loud noise, the water wave actually passed through the ninth Kulpa King's giant palm and then wrapped the giant palm in it. Like a millstone, it began to grind away the divine power on the giant palm. Oh! When the ninth Kulpa King saw this, he raised his head and looked at the Water Sorcerer Ruler for the first time. His eyes revealed a hint of surprise. "His use of the principles of heaven and earth is rather intriguing," he said with a faint smile. At the outermost area of the crowd, Rangu and Qingxi were extremely excited when they saw this scene. Even Jian Wushuang could not help but raise his eyebrows. Boom! 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 The water wave wrapped around the ninth Kulpa King's giant palm layer by layer, constantly crushing and erasing the divine power on the giant palm. This water wave was also rapidly annihilated at a speed visible to the naked eye. Water Sorcerer Ruler stared at this sight, a voice roaring in his mind. Destroy! Destroy! Time slowly passed, and after a short while, more than half of the ninth Kulpa King's giant palm's power had been worn down, while only a thin layer remained of Water Sorcerer Ruler's water wave. Water Sorcerer Ruler's expression was extremely grim. A thin layer of sweat had even appeared on his forehead due to his extreme nervousness. Just as the ninth Kulpa King's huge palm was about to be completely obliterated by the Water Sorcerer Ruler's water wave, the ninth Kulpa King seemed to know the outcome. He retracted his gaze and said indifferently, Your usage of the rules is not bad. It's a pity that you're still a little lacking in terms of your own strength. Water Sorcerer Ruler was taken aback. He did not understand what they were saying. What? Before he could finish. Bang! The water wave, which was already as thin as a cicada's wing, was actually annihilated and shattered before the ninth Culpa King's huge palm that was about to be annihilated. No! Water Sorcerer Ruler's face twisted, and a look of unwillingness flashed through his eyes. However, the outcome was already decided. You may leave. The ninth Culpa King shook his head. From what he could see, the Water Sorcerer Ruler's use of divine power was quite good. But it was only good. It would not make him look at it in a new light. This Water Sorcerer Ruler felt as if all his energy had been sucked out of his body, and he fell into a daze. Not being able to join the ninth Culpa King's camp meant that he would not even have a place to stand in the Tarot ruins, let alone avenge his innocent eldest disciple who had died tragically. Yes, thank you for your guidance, ninth Culpa King. Water Sorcerer Ruler forced a smile on his face and cupped his hands at the ninth Culpa King. He then turned around and walked out of the crowd. No one knew how heavy his steps were at this moment. To him, if he missed this opportunity, he might never have the chance to avenge his disciple in this life. The crowd gradually parted to form a path. All of the ultimate rulers present were looking at Water Sorcerer Ruler with rather complicated gazes. Even though he did not manage to withstand the palm strike of the ninth Culpa King in the end, anyone with a discerning eye could tell that the palm strike of the ninth Culpa King had already reached its limit. Perhaps, as long as the water wave of the Water Sorcerer Ruler could last for another 3 breaths, the outcome would be completely different. Water Sorcerer Ruler had proven his power. In this world, the strong were always respected. Little Ching, little Gu, I've tried my best. Water Sorcerer Ruler let out a long sigh after returning. He did not need to think to know how disappointed and dejected Rangu and Qingxi, who had always been close to his eldest disciple, would be. Master, you've already done very well. Suddenly, he heard Rangu's gentle voice. Water Sorcerer Ruler raised his head and saw Rangu smiling at him with a warm smile. That's right, Master. You're amazing today. That's the ninth Culpa King, the most powerful ruler recognized in the universe. You were on par with him just now. If it weren't for the slight difference in the end, you would have defeated him. You're already very strong. Qingxi raised her head and laughed with a proud look. Water Sorcerer Ruler could not help but feel a little touched upon seeing this, and his heavy mood brightened up a little. Don't talk nonsense. The ninth Culpa King only used a casual palm strike, but I went all out. How can we be compared? Water Sorcerer Ruler glared at Qingxi as she chided with a smile. Aya, it's almost the same, Qingxi said with a smile. Jian Wushuang felt warm in his heart as he watched this scene. In the hundreds of thousands of years he had cultivated, he was used to seeing killing and plundering, used to seeing the coldness of human relationships, used to seeing the indifference of the world, but he had rarely seen people as pure and simple as the master and disciple before him. A moment later, Water Sorcerer Ruler turned to look at Jian Wushuang and said apologetically, Little friend Bloodsword, we're planning to leave the Tarot ruins, so we can't protect you. Jian Wushuang nodded and replied, Water Sorcerer Ruler, where are you planning to go next? Let's go back to our own star area. Although it's a bit remote, it's safe there. There aren't many experts there, so it might be more suitable for us. Water Sorcerer Ruler growled. Jian Wushuang thought for a while and then nodded. For them, perhaps returning to the star area that belonged to them was the best choice. Therefore, he did not try to stop them. Even though Jian Wushuang believed that he would have no problem protecting the 3 of them with his current strength, it might not be a good thing for them to force them to stay. He respected the choice of these 3 people. Little friend Bloodsword, we'll meet again if there's a chance. Goodbye, Bloodsword. We are in the Mountain Sun Astral of the Void Wind Starfield. If you have time, you can come and find us. Bloodsword, you're not strong either. It's best if you leave this place as well. I don't want to see you die here like my eldest senior. Oh, I don't mean to say that you're going to die. In short, take good care of yourself. Water Sorcerer Ruler, Rangu, and Qingxi bade farewell to Jian Wushuang. I will. Jian Wushuang nodded with a smile. After that, the three of them left the place step by step and walked into the distance. As for Jian Wushuang, he pulled down his hood and lowered his head as he walked toward the ninth Culpa King step by step. He was wearing a wide black robe and had pulled down his hood, so his face was completely hidden. Only his chin could be vaguely seen. What is this little fourth-stage great ruler doing? Could it be that this fourth-stage ruler also wants to test his moves against the ninth Culpa King? A fourth-stage chief ruler? What a joke. In the midst of the discussion, Jian Wushuang's expression was calm, and he stood in front of ninth Culpa King. You want to try too? The ninth Culpa King looked down at Jian Wushuang, and his eyes suddenly narrowed. Divine Marquis Qingfeng also frowned. In the Tarot ruins, there were many ultimate rulers, and the number of fifth-stage rulers was much less. As for fourth-stage rulers, they were even rarer. Now, a fourth-stage ruler had appeared in front of him with a divine sword on his back. He was clearly a sword cultivator. This made ninth Culpa King instantly think of Jian Wushuang. But very quickly, the ninth Culpa King denied this judgment. The reason was that the aura emitted by the black sect person in front of him was very different from Jian Wushuang's. In the ninth Culpa King's impression, Jian Wushuang's aura was calm and restrained, like a peerless divine sword hidden in a scabbard. However, the black-robed man in front of him gave people the feeling that he was extremely dark, extremely cold, and emotionless. The difference in aura was so great that neither ninth Culpa King nor Divine Marquis Qingfeng recognized Jian Wushuang. The reason for this was that after Jian Wushuang controlled the Tarot Divine Sword, his soul aura could be completely covered by the Tarot Divine Sword. The extremely cold and dark aura that he was emitting now was the aura that the Tarot Divine Sword had. Under such circumstances, unless the ninth Culpa King saw Jian Wushuang's appearance, or someone like Lung Rushuang who could recognize Jian Wushuang from his figure or simple actions, the ninth Culpa King and Divine Marquis Qingfeng would naturally not be able to recognize him. They had assumed that this black-robed man was also a fourth-stage ruler who had ventured into the Tarot ruins, and one who had overestimated his own abilities. Even a weaker peak ultimate ruler could not take a palm from the ninth Culpa King. Many people thought that a fourth-stage ruler was overestimating his own ability. At this moment, Jian Wushuang was covered in a black robe. After hearing ninth Culpa King's words, he did not answer. Instead, he directly reached out and pulled out the divine sword behind him, using his own actions as a reply. Jian Wushuang carried two divine swords on his back. The divine swords that he had pulled out were red and had a faint sense of sharpness that could cut through the sky. It was the Wuxia divine sword that had changed greatly after being modified by the sword spirit of Tarot. As for the other sword, it was wrapped by ancient vines, and its aura was ordinary. Make your move. A hoarse voice came from under the black robe. Hiding your head and showing your tail, pretending to be mysterious, not knowing the immensity of the heavens and earth. The ninth Culpa King shook his head expressionlessly. Then he raised his right hand and pressed down on Jian Wushuang. Boom! In an instant, the giant palm that had defeated countless enemies gathered in the void, covered the sky, and pressed down on Jian Wushuang with a terrifying power. As for Jian Wushuang, he looked as if he had been scared silly. He kept his head down and did not have any intention to resist. Instantly, the countless spectating ultimate rulers, upon seeing this, couldn't help but gloat. This little guy has probably never seen such a terrifying palm before, right? Ha ha ha. Look, he's scared silly. The juniors nowadays are really overestimating themselves. The Omega rulers all chuckled and shook their heads. To them, Jian Wushuang's voluntary act was like a funny interlude in the solemn atmosphere. Watch carefully. This little guy will definitely be frightened by the ninth Culpa King's palm and leave a psychological shadow. In the void not far away, Water Sorcerer Ruler and the other two, who had already walked far away, could not help but turn back to take a look when they sensed the huge commotion. As a result, the three of them were stunned by what they saw. Master, that... Was it the blood sword that was receiving the ninth Culpa King's palm? Ruler Rangu rubbed his eyes in disbelief. Water Sorcerer Ruler had a look of surprise on his face as well. He nodded and said in surprise, "It's indeed our young friend, Bloodsword. This guy, what do you want to do?" When Xianxia saw this, she couldn't help but stomp her feet in worry and blame him. Water Sorcerer Ruler shook his head with a wry smile. "Little friend Bloodsword, I think you're unwilling to accept the fact that I've been defeated and can't join the Ninth Culpa King's camp. You want to try it yourself." The three of them did not know whether they should say that Jian Wushuang was overestimating himself or that a newborn calf was not afraid of a tiger. The three of them stopped in their tracks and decided to take a look. If Jian Wushuang was injured by the palm, they could save him. Boom! 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 The giant palm pressed down inch by inch, twisting the void and shaking the entire mountain range. As for Jian Wushuang, he still had no intention of making a move. 3,000 feet, 500 feet. The giant palm was getting closer and closer to Jian Wushuang. The strong wind caused his black robe to flutter. What's going on? Is this person here to play with this seat? The Ninth Culpa King frowned, and a touch of displeasure flashed in his eyes. If this continued, Jian Wushuang would be crushed to death by the power of the palm. 200 feet. The giant palm completely suppressed all the light above Jian Wushuang, as if a mass of thick and huge dark clouds had shrouded him. Is this little fellow here to seek death on purpose? What is he doing? Some of the spectating ultimate rulers couldn't help but shake their heads. Water Sorcerer Ruler and the other two felt their hearts tighten. "My young friend, what is he trying to do?" Water Sorcerer Ruler could not understand Jian Wushuang at all. "Blood Sword, you bastard, run," Xianxia said with an anxious expression. Just as the giant palm was about to press down on Jian Wushuang's head, the Ninth Culpa King raised his arm and intended to disperse the power of the giant palm. Jian Wushuang's 5 well-defined fingers finally clenched slowly. "It's time to see how much I've improved in the past 1,000 years. A faint smile appeared on Jian Wushuang's face, which was covered by the huge hood. The next moment, he suddenly swung his sword. Chi! In an instant, a blood-red sword light shot out from the Weeping Wu divine sword and soared into the sky. This sword was fast to the extreme. Everyone did not even have time to see how this sword was slashed out. They only felt a blur before their eyes, and they saw that this blood-colored sword light had shockingly already cleaved onto that huge palm that covered the sky and the sun. At this moment, with the wailing of gods and the chanting of Buddhas and demons, the blood-red sword light split the huge palm into two like a bolt of lightning that tore the dark night. There was no resistance at all. Like a knife cutting through tofu, the huge palm that covered the sky directly collapsed. Chi chi chi. The sky regained its light. As for Jian Wushuang, he had already put away the divine sword Wu Qi. What? This? How is this possible? One sword had destroyed the Ninth Culpa King's giant palm? I'm not seeing things, right? What just happened? The spectating ultimate rulers were stunned at first, as if their brains had crashed. They could not react. Then, they looked at Jian Wushuang with horror on their faces. The palm strike that countless ultimate rulers had been unable to withstand despite using all their might had been defeated by a 4th-level ruler with a single sword strike. Countless people were dumbfounded. They were so shocked that their eyeballs were about to fall out. Water Sorcerer Ruler and the other two spectating from off in the distance all had extremely interesting expressions on their faces. Senior brother Rangu, pinch me to see if I'm hallucinating." The young girl Xianxia's mouth was wide open, and her pretty face was full of disbelief. Rangu was not doing any better. His entire body was trembling as he muttered unconsciously, "How is that possible? He's just a ruler of the 4th level. Even Master wasn't able to take this blow, so how could he possibly?" Water Sorcerer Ruler was completely stunned, and he stood there in a daze. Was this still the humble little friend who smiled and said that he would let him take them along? He could not help but smile bitterly. He had previously said that he would let the Blood Sword join the Ninth Culpa King's camp by relying on him, but unexpectedly, Water Sorcerer Ruler shook his head and let out a long sigh from the bottom of his heart. The future generations are formidable. At the same time, the Ninth Culpa King, who was standing in the void, had a divine light in his eyes that suddenly grew 3 inches. He was all too familiar with this sword essence. It was this sword essence that had defeated him in the trial arena. However, if the black-robed man in front of him was really that person should not be so strong, right? And the aura that this black-robed man was giving off was completely different. Thoughts flashed through the ninth Culpa King's mind like lightning. He lowered his head and looked over with a complicated expression. Under everyone's gaze, Jian Wushuang raised his head and pushed down the wide hood on his head, gradually revealing a fair and delicate face. Ninth Culpa King, long time no see. Jian Wushuang smiled. Jian Wushuang, it's you. The ninth Culpa King's body trembled, and a touch of disbelief gushed out of his eyes. Then he took a heavy step forward and stood in front of Jian Wushuang. He sized up Jian Wushuang and asked in surprise, Jian Wushuang, where have you been in the past 1,000 years? And your aura, why did it completely change? We'll talk about this later. Jian Wushuang smiled and shook his head. Then, he looked behind him and saw a figure rushing over. Jian Wushuang. Divine Marquis Qingfeng strode over and hugged Jian Wushuang. He laughed heartily and said, Ha 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 ha. Jian Wushuang, I'm finally relieved to see that you're fine. At this moment, the divine power in his body had recovered completely, and it even seemed to have improved a little. Divine Marquis Qingfeng looked at Jian Wushuang and said with a smile, Jian Wushuang, do you still remember the promise we made 1,000 years ago? Jian Wushuang nodded and replied with a smile, How could I not remember? 1,000 years ago they were chased by Qing Shuzi. When they separated and escaped, they made a promise that if they could survive this time, they would drink and chat merrily when they met again. Let's go, Jian Wushuang. Tell us where you've been for the past 1,000 years. Even I can't see through you now. Divine Marquis Qingfeng pulled Jian Wushuang and prepared to enter the palace. For the past 1,000 years, Divine Marquis Qingfeng had been filled with guilt over Jian Wushuang's finger. He thought that it was him who had dragged Jian Wushuang down and caused him to be unable to escape Qing Shuzi's pursuit. Even though the ruler Bloodwave had sent them a message later to inform them that Jian Wushuang was not dead, the guilt in his heart had not lessened at all. Now he finally saw that Jian Wushuang had returned safely and seemed to be stronger than before. The guilt in his heart that was hanging in his throat finally settled. Aren't you going to continue to select experts? Jian Wushuang asked. Divine Marquis Qingfeng did not reply, but Ninth Culpa King shook his head and snorted in disdain. If they have the strength to take my palm, they would have come out long ago. Those who are still here and don't dare to try are just some stinky fish and rotten shrimp. Even if there are people who can take my palm, they are just cowards. What's the use of them? You're quite clear on this. Jian Wushuang nodded in agreement. Soon, the 3 of them entered the palace. Ruler Spear River and the others who had passed the Ninth Culpa King's test followed closely behind in awe. The palace gate slowly closed. What? The many ultimate rulers present could not help but look at each other in shock. What is this? Aren't we competing? From the looks of it, we probably won't be able to enter the Ninth Culpa King's camp. The ultimate rulers who had not tried shook their heads with bitter smiles. However, they had already expected this outcome, and it was their own choice. Therefore, they were not too depressed. Compared to this, they were more concerned about the identity of the 4th-level ruler, who had appeared last and cut through the Ninth Culpa King's giant palm with one sword. Everyone, from what I saw just now, this 4th-level ruler with extremely terrifying strength seems to know the Ninth Culpa King and the others? You're talking nonsense. When did you see the expressions of the Ninth Culpa King and Divine Marquis Qingfeng? When have they ever been so friendly to us? Given his power as a 4th-level chief ruler, he should be extremely famous throughout the universe. How come I've never heard of someone like him before? Just as everyone was in doubt and whispering to each other, an ultimate ruler suddenly thought of something and exclaimed, I know who that person was. Eh? Who is he? Everyone turned to look at the ultimate ruler. The ultimate ruler took a deep breath, then said in a low voice, I'm sure you're all familiar with the battle in Fengyang Canyon 1,000 years ago? Everyone nodded. 1,000 years ago, in the Fengyang Canyon, all the top forces had fought each other for a divine medicine that could increase the chance of breaking through to the supreme level. Naturally, they were familiar with that. Do you still remember that there was a 4th-level ruler in the 9th Culpa King's team? The final ruler continued. I remember. There was such a person back then. That's right. I remember that he fought with Qing Shuzi for a while and was not at a disadvantage at all. I was there at the time, and I was surprised for a while. The black-robed swordsman was the one who fought with Qing Shuzi 1,000 years ago? 1,000 years ago, Jian Wushuang had fought with Qing Shuzi head-on as a 4th-stage ruler. The battle was dazzling and the news had spread. Now that it was pointed out, everyone immediately remembered it. At the same time, everyone remembered that after the battle in Fengyang Canyon, Qing Shuzi had gone after this man at all costs. Then this person is in big trouble. 1,000 years ago, son of God Qing Su chased after this person, but his whereabouts were unknown. The people of the Great Void Temple have been searching for son of God Qing Su all this time. That's right. Back then, son of God Qing Su disappeared because he was chasing after this person. Now that this person has returned safely, the people from the Great Void Temple will definitely come to find him. TSK. That Qing Shuzi is the current divine son of the Great Void Temple. He can be said to be the most outstanding genius in the past hundreds, if not thousands of chaos cycles. In the end, he disappeared in the Taro ruins because he was chasing after this person. That's not all. However, this person has returned safely. It's obvious that the people of the Great Void Temple will be furious and vent all their anger on this person. Let's wait and see. Once the people from the Great Void Temple hear about this, they will come to find this person soon. Many ultimate rulers shook their heads and discussed. They did not think Jian Wushuang's future would be promising. Even though Jian Wushuang's performance just now was very strong, one must know that the Great Void Temple was a great undying force that shook the entire universe. In the hall, Jian Wushuang, 9th Culpa King, and Divine Marquis Qingfeng sat cross-legged. In front of them were 3 low tea tables with a few pots of spirit wine on them. Jian Wushuang, can you tell me where you have been for the past 1,000 years? Divine Marquis Qingfeng asked with a smile. The 9th Culpa King remained silent at the side, but his eyes inadvertently glanced at Jian Wushuang. It could be seen that he was also very curious about where Jian Wushuang had been in the past 1,000 years and why his aura had changed so much after he returned. Jian Wushuang picked up his wine cup and took a sip. Then he said, "It's a long story. When Qing Shuzi was chasing me, I had no choice but to keep running. In the end, I ran to a special place at the edge of the Taro ruins. There, I got rid of Qing Shuzi and obtained some special opportunities which improved my strength. As for my aura, I just concealed it with some means." Jian Wushuang only gave a simple explanation. He did not plan to tell anyone about the 2nd level of the Taro ruins. After all, it was a matter of great importance. The things inside were enough to make a supreme master jealous. Speaking of which, Divine Marquis Qingfeng and 9th Culpa King had gone through life and death with him. However, it was hard to predict a person's heart. No one knew if the two of them would have any evil intentions after knowing that Jian Wushuang had obtained the greatest opportunity in the 2nd level of the Taro ruins. Even if the two of them did not do anything, once the news was leaked, Jian Wushuang knew without a doubt that the entire universe would come after him. Even the divine palace of life would not be able to protect him. After all, it was the inheritance of ruler Taro. Just the various treasures and universe origin stones inside were enough to make many experts in the universe boil, not to mention the Taro sword manual, which was an unrivaled superpower that shocked the ancient times, as well as the famous Taro divine sword. After hearing Jian Wushuang's explanation, 9th Culpa King and Divine Marquis Qingfeng exchanged a look and smiled. They could tell that Jian Wushuang's explanation was perfunctory, but they did not blame him. After all, everyone had secrets. They were curious about Jian Wushuang's experience over the past 1,000 years, but since he was unwilling to say too much, they naturally would not ask. Jian Wushuang, it's good that you've returned safely. With you here, we have more confidence in the final battle. Divine Marquis Qingfeng said with a smile. The final battle? Jian Wushuang raised his eyebrows and a hint of doubt flashed in his eyes. The ninth Culpa King nodded and said indifferently, "It's time for us to leave the Taro ruins, but before we leave..." The ninth Culpa King's words paused, and a fierce look flashed in his eyes. "I have to settle the accounts first." Hearing this, Jian Wushuang understood, and a cold light flashed in his eyes. "What do you plan to do?" Jian Wushuang said. "What do we do? Of course," the ninth Culpa King said with a cold smile. "We'll go straight to his door and crush the Silver Rock's divine body inch by inch. We'll burn his soul to ashes." "What time?" Jian Wushuang nodded and asked. "Any time," the ninth Culpa King replied. 3 days later, Jian Wushuang replied after some thought. At this point, the time was set. Jian Wushuang, ninth Culpa King, and Divine Marquis Qingfeng chatted for a while more before they left. In a sealed bedroom, Jian Wushuang sat cross-legged with the tarot sword manual floating in front of his knees. Jian Wushuang turned to the first page. Slowly, the world in front of him turned into a dead darkness again. He continued to sink into the comprehension of the sword move, Eternal Night. Although he had only comprehended a little bit of this move, its power had already become the most lethal move in Jian Wushuang's hands. It could be said that Eternal Night had already become one of Jian Wushuang's trump cards. Once it was used, it would definitely shock the heavens. 3 days passed by in a flash. On the morning of the third day, ninth Culpa King, Jian Wushuang, Divine Marquis Qingfeng, and the other ultimate rulers who had submitted to ninth Culpa King gathered in the hall. "I won't hide it from you. Our first battle is to kill the ruler Silver Rock. If anyone wants to leave, I won't stop them." The ninth Culpa King stood in the main seat of the hall and said with his hands behind his back. As soon as he finished speaking, the hall instantly became noisy, and the faces of the many ultimate rulers changed slightly. "You're going to kill ruler Silver Rock?" The ruler Silver Rock has many experts under his command. He has dozens of ultimate rulers. Although they aren't strong individually, if they work together, I'm afraid it'll be... Isn't this a little too dangerous? A few of the ultimate rulers immediately shrank back, their eyes flashing with the intention to retreat. They followed the ninth Culpa King to find a backer, but not to fight to the death. "After this battle is over, I'm willing to give up everything you've acquired from killing the Silver Rock. You can have it all." The ninth Culpa King continued to speak indifferently. After he said this, the ultimate rulers, who had originally intended to retreat, were shocked. The ninth Culpa King doesn't want any of them? As the leader of a faction, the ruler Silver Rock has collected countless divine medicines and divine materials over the years. If we really kill him, wealth is found in danger. The hearts of the many ultimate rulers jumped, and hesitation appeared on their faces. "I'll give you the time it takes for an incense stick to burn to consider. After that, give me your answer." After the time it takes for an incense stick to burn. All the ultimate rulers present took a deep breath and seemed to have made a decision. They said in unison, "Ninth Culpa King, I'm willing to follow you in battle." Upon hearing this, the ninth Culpa King's always indifferent face could not help but smile slightly. He nodded and replied, "Good." At the same time, in the central area of the Taro ruins on another plane. This place was much more lively than the other places in the Taro ruins. Many ultimate rulers had set up camp here, forming a lively scene. In the largest hall, the ruler Silver Rock was chatting with a group of people with a warm smile on his face. There were 2 people sitting beside him. The one on the left was wearing a purple gold crown and a 9-clawed dragon robe. He had a dignified look and a light golden flame mark between his eyebrows. If the water sorcerer ruler was here, he would recognize that this person was the 3rd prince of the Dafeng Divine Kingdom, which was ranked 2nd in the Taro ruins. The other person was wearing a red robe, his figure tall and sturdy, his hair tied into a ponytail that hung loosely on his back, and he was sitting barefooted. It was Lord Jinan, ruler Silver Rock. "Why have you suddenly called me over?" Lord Jinan frowned and said impatiently. The 3rd prince of the Dafeng Divine Kingdom was also the ruler Silver Rock, and he had an ugly expression on his face. Not too long ago, The two of them had suddenly received a message from the ruler Silver Rock. He had asked them to gather here and discuss some important matters. As expected, the Blood Sky Palace didn't come. Ruler Silver Rock muttered to himself as he looked at the empty seat of the three he had prepared. Then, he turned his head to look at Lord Jinan and the third prince. He smiled and said, "Have you heard about the 9th Kulpa King recruiting experts recently?" "What?" Lord Jinan raised his eyebrows when he heard this. He naturally knew that the 9th Kulpa King had not deliberately concealed the fact that he was recruiting strong practitioners. "I know. This isn't a secret, right? Silver Rock, just say what you want to say. You know that this king hates keeping people in suspense the most. Your Highness, please calm down. There's something strange about this. Listen to me in detail." The ruler Silver Rock's expression was calm. He cleared his throat and slowly said, "I know the 9th Kulpa King the best. He has always been arrogant and conceited, and he looks down on others. Therefore, he rarely goes with others, let alone recruit people. Thus, once he recruits people, he can be certain that something big is about to happen." Something big? Lord Jinan's pupils shrank when he heard this. The third prince of the Defeng Divine Kingdom also looked interested. "Yes." Ruler Silver Rock nodded, then continued. "The 9th Kulpa King has been in the ultimate ruler realm for dozens of chaos cycles, causing his status in the divine palace of life to plummet. We don't have to think to know that he must be very anxious to break through to the supremacy stage. 1,000 years ago, in the Fengyang Canyon, the 9th Kulpa King broke through our encirclement and obtained the divine medicine that could increase the chances of breaking through to the supreme realm. Now, it's time for him to return and break through to the supreme realm. So, if he's going back, then he's going back. What does that have to do with us? Don't tell me that you're still thinking of taking back the supreme divine medicine in his hands." Lord Jinan asked indifferently.